calling to order the June 6th Londonderry Utilities Committee meeting. We're in the Moose Hill Conference Room in Town Hall. And just one note for the general public here, there's two exits from this room, either end of the conference room. If there's an emergency, just go outside through the nearest door and just wait outside until our public safety people come and let you know what the next step is. So with that, we'll open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have a pretty full agenda tonight, so my job is going to be to kind of keep us on track and move us along. So I think with that said, we'll start. Number two on the agenda is public comment. Any comment from the public? I'd say no. So we'll close that and we'll move on to presentation. We need Mike to run the.
Mike's in the process of trying to upload that to the computer.
Okay, so good. So, but we have some people here from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services to talk to us about water. I don't know how you want to work it. Couple of seats here in front. We got the podium, whatever.
I think I'll probably go to the computer screen.
Okay.
once he gets that, uploaded.
Okay.
Do you want us to do introduction?
Yeah, why don't you do introductions? Come on up and do introductions.
Yeah, you can tell us who you all are.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Martz. I'm the administrator of the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau at New Hampshire DES in the Waste Management Division. Our bureau is tasked with the investigation and remediation of PFAS contamination and other legacy contaminants at contaminated sites across the state.
Hi, I'm Amy Rousseau. I'm the PFAS response coordinator for the DES. So I am the point of contact when anyone calls, as well as I administer different funds for different reasons, one of them being the PFAS removal rebate program, as well as the PFAS remediation grant and loan fund.
Great.
Hello, my name is Andrew Fuller, and I'm with the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau. I am the project manager for the St. Cobain Performance Plastics site, as well as the Tinkham Garage Superfund site, so I have a little bit of experience with contaminated sites in Londonderry. So.
Great.
And I'm Brandon Kernan. I'm the administrator of the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. We regulate public water systems throughout the state. We also administer a large number of financial assistance, both loan and grant programs for public water systems, for general infrastructure projects, and also for contaminants and emerging contaminants.
Great, thank you. And before we get going, I'd like to thank Mr. Dunn. He's our state rep, member of the committee. And Mr. Dunn was the one who was instrumental in orchestrating having the.
My pleasure. I'll tell you, anytime I ask Amy something, Amy comes through. So thank you, Amy, for bringing your team here. It's a very good resource.
Excellent. I'll second that.
Is there a way to turn the TVs on for the committee to see?
They seem to be going off when they should be on when they're forward.
Hey.
Beautiful. All right, great. So I'm going to start with just give you a brief overview. I know many of you are well familiar with the occurrence of PFAS in the town of Londonderry, but I'm just going to give a brief overview to kind of set the contextual stage for any questions that might come up. So we're going to talk about PFAS sites, drinking water sampling, and some PFAS occurrence. So I want to point out that PFAS in Londonderry really became under scrutiny about in 2019 when the standards for PFOA in particular and three other compounds that we regulate were lowered to fairly low levels, 12 parts per trillion for PFOA. And there's a few major sites I want to point out. St. Cobain Performance Plastics, located in Merrimack, is an air emitter of PFAS, has impacted numerous wells. And I want to point out the blue line, which is the St. Cobain consent decree. So inside that blue line, St. Cobain is responsible for investigation and remediation. outside that blue line, they don't have responsibility to investigate through an agreement set up between DES and Saint-Gobain back in 2018. But I also want to point out there are some discrete sites, such as the Manchester Airport, where AFFF has been used over the years, tanker spill. There's the Auburn Road Landfill Superfund site, the Apple Tree Mall, Tinkham Garage Superfund site, and a handful of others scattered across town. So while you can think of this overlay of air deposition from Saint-Gobain, you do have these individual sites.
Can we ask questions as you go along?
Yeah, certainly.
Do we know that there are PFAS contaminants in any of the Superfund sites?
There are some PFAS contaminants in the Superfund sites, so that's one thing that's looked at each of those Superfund sites, as well as other legacy contaminants like chlorinated volatile organic compounds. So,
Right. But which, all 4 of them have PFAS?
so Manchester Airport has PFAS related to AFFF use.
Right.
The tanker spill, I believe AFFF was applied as the tanker spill, and there was also some petroleum because it was a petroleum spill, and they applied AFFF. But when you kind of drill down and look at the tanker spill, I think there's areas around the tanker spill that are impacted by Saint-Gobain, or would appear to be related to Saint-Gobain, and then there's a different type of PFAS associated with the AFFF use around the tanker spill. So it kind of becomes somewhat tricky at times to disentangle the different sources.
Well, what about Auburn Road and Tinkham?
Auburn Road has some PFAS, but the PFAS at Auburn Road appear to be constrained to the main plume associated with that Superfund site, the legacy contaminants. So they're not really expanding beyond the boundaries of that Superfund site.
The plume hasn't moved
It hit.
all these years?
I don't have a lot of detail on that particular one. I could get back to you and talk to the project manager. Tinkham Garage, it's currently under investigation to define the extent of the contamination, and Andy Fuller could talk more about that if you have specific questions after I go through the overview.
Okay.
So like I said, we have a number of individual sites and then this overall air deposition from Saint-Gobain.
Could you just tell us what the pre-GMZ is?
So the pre-GMZ, let's see, go back. So the pre-GMZ is an area that both the pre-GMZ and the Saint-Gobain consent decree were part of negotiated boundaries. So these are more of a legal constraint or lines drawn as a result of legal negotiations between DES and Saint-Gobain. And the pre-GMZ is a line that encapsulates most of the water supply wells that were contaminated to our prior standard for PFOA of 70 parts per trillion. So most of the wells that exceed 70 parts per trillion are within that pre-GMZ area. And that does not extend into the town of Londonderry. I believe the boundary is right on the edge there.
Now, that EPA was not involved in those discussions, in that consent decree?
EPA was
Or
not a
those
party of those
negotiations
discussions.
With Saint-Gobain?
No, not with Saint-Gobain.
Okay. So it's just DES and Saint-Gobain?
DES and presumably DOJ. I know those negotiations happened before I joined DES. But
DOJ was involved and EPA wasn't? That would be weird.
I presume the State Department of Justice.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me, is it possible to see that agreement?
Yes, that's on our website. There are links to that agreement. So we could certainly email you a link if needed.
Yeah, be helpful to see it in writing, printed.
Ray, I can get you a copy of that.
Thank you.
I'm just confused too on, and a lot of people are, on the boundaries, how the boundaries were actually determined. And because there hadn't been a lot of investigation outside those boundaries, when those boundaries were determined. So it's just, it seems pretty arbitrary.
Yeah, like I said, those were the product of legal negotiations. So they're not necessarily scientifically derived boundaries. I think the pre-GMZ does encompass most of the wells that exceed 70 parts per trillion. So if you look at that from that perspective, I think that line is fairly accurate in encompassing the extent of 70 part per trillion PFOA groundwater contamination.
But don't we have wells, private wells that have higher than 70 parts per billion outside the consent decree?
There's a relatively small number, but the vast majority are encompassed within that pre-GMZ boundary. There are a handful scattered around outside the pre-GMZ, but by and large, the vast majority are inside the pre-GMZ.
Excuse me. I think, particularly when you're talking about Tinkham Superfund site, there's some over 500. True?
Well, true, but we're talking about contamination that is largely attributed to Saint-Gobain. So the pre-GMZ wasn't drawn with respect to Tinkham Garage. That was between Saint-Gobain and the state, so it was independent of Tinkham Garage.
Okay.
Any other questions on this slide before
Yeah,
we move
do
on?
you have any numbers, or can you tell us how many private wells that have been tested by DES are outside the line?
That's a great question. Let me move to the next slide, which has those
Okay,
statistics.
alrighty,
I knew that'd be a question. So I'm going to just caveat, these are draft numbers that I pulled out of a quick analysis from GIS today. So these represent and are approximate totals of wells with what we call PFAS data that are uploaded to our EMD database, environmental monitoring database. And by querying that database, I came up with these statistics. So approximately 2,200, 2,300 wells have been sampled in the town of Londonderry. Roughly 872 of those are located inside the consent decree. So those were primarily sampled by Saint-Gobain. Some of them may have been sampled by DES. And then about 1,400 were sampled outside the consent decree. So of the 2,300 wells that were sampled in Londonderry, approximately 990 exceed the AGQS, or Ambient Groundwater Quality Standard, for PFOA. And about 440 of those are inside the consent decree, inside the blue line, so to the west of High Range Road, and 550 of those are outside or to the east of High Range Road.
And this is the
Oh, yeah.
current standard,
That's correct. This is
current
the
state standard, not the previous one and not the federal one.
this is the currently enforceable standard for PFOA in New Hampshire. So
In New Hampshire.
So this does not include the EPA March new regs, since that's not finalized.
that's correct.
proposed regs.
I queried wells that were greater than 12 parts per trillion for PFOA to come up with these numbers. So it would be a different number, a greater number if you were to query on 4. I don't know exactly what
4
that would
parts
be.
per
But.
trillion, yep.
Out of all those wells, do you have the actual reading of PFOAs or whatever the contaminant is in those wells? I mean, the ones in red, for instance, are 12 to 70. I think we need to know actually what the reading is in those wells.
So we have the exact,
That's the data.
we have the value in our environmental monitoring database. So that's an electronic repository of the laboratory data. So we know the value that the lab generated for each of these water supply wells. And, it'd be a busy map if we try to
It's on
put all
your
the numbers on
website?
there.
Yeah. If you go on that website.
But you
can
don't
click on
have
those
the data
data
from
points, and
people
it'll tell you how
that
much
did
the
their own testing,
And you get just that?
right? That
You get that, and you can click on those data
homeowners
points.
that
Yeah.
went
It'll tell you
to
how much,
Granite State or whatever,
FA
went
was in that
someplace else and had their water tested.
In some cases, we do. A number of residents submitted their PFAS data to the state, and then we've populated that into the environmental monitoring database. So in those cases, we would have that data, but certainly there's no requirement that people submit their data to us. So undoubtedly, there are people with results that we're not aware of. So this is only the data in EMD, the data that we know about.
Sure.
Quick question, just for my own edification. What is considered the safe level? Because I believe my husband and I saw a recent article that said it was no longer considered 70, it was considered significantly less than that. So
Less.
professional opinion, what would you say, even like the 0 to 6?
So currently, the state has an enforceable standard of 12 parts per trillion. So we would recommend if anything is over 12 parts per trillion, that you use some sort of alternate water.
But the federal government is 4 parts per trillion. For a couple of the PFAS chemicals, there are about 12,000 chemicals, specific chemicals that fit under that umbrella. So you're talking tons and, lots and lots. But for certain of those chemicals, EPA has come out with 4 parts per trillion, which is very, very low. And I can just say, having worked for EPA for 42 years, we never go up. Our standards very rarely go up. When we come down to 4 parts per trillion, if anything, we go down. We don't go up.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I do think it's important to just make note of the fact that the federal government has given notice of its intention to regulate down to 4, I believe it is, but.
No, they proposed those regulations. They're out for public comment. The
Correct.
public
They're
comment
not-
period just ended.
Yeah, they're not enforceable at this point in
Correct.
time.
Right. They will be.
I have a question. So I have an article, and this might be what you're referring to, Mike, and this, educate me if I'm wrong, but it says EPA provisionally recommends PFOA and PFOS exposure no more than 0.004 parts per trillion.
Right.
Is that after filtering? Because if we're talking about 12, and the difference between 12 and 0.004 is, I'd have to do math real quick, but that's a lot. So are we talking are we looking at apples and apples, or are we looking at apples and very tighter apples? Am I asking that correctly?
Yeah, so the EPA has a health advisory down to 0.004 parts per trillion, and then they have a proposed maximum contaminant level of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA.
So is that from the well, or is that from my faucet?
So those are for drinking water, for public water supplies. But in New Hampshire, we would, if the EPA were to adopt a federal maximum contaminant level, our state law requires us to adopt that as a federal maximum contaminant level, which then is adopted as an ambient groundwater quality standard. So that would apply to, an ambient groundwater quality standard would then apply to contaminated sites and basically well water coming out of the well and out of your tap.
So I'm not sure you answered my question. That's my fault. So are you saying if they adapt this 0.004, that everything here, even down to 1, would be above the standard? Or is it correctable to 0.004?
I think you need to explain the difference between a health advisory and a groundwater quality standard. That's the source of
And again, I'm
confusion.
new to this, so I'm drinking from a fire hose.
Sure. Yeah. So a health advisory is not an enforceable standard. So that's a recommendation by EPA. Whereas the maximum contaminant level, MCL, and AGQS, ambient groundwater quality standard, those are enforceable numbers that could be enforced. So there's a recommendation, a health guidance from the EPA for a very low level that's below what most laboratories can even measure. And then there's the enforceable number, which they've proposed to be at 4 parts per trillion for the contaminant PFOA.
But they also don't regulate, you guys don't regulate private wells. So this would be, the onus would be on the private well owner.
It's up to you. It's up to you to make sure what's coming out of your tap meets that standard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so that's right. Unless a private well has been contaminated by a release of contaminants at a contaminated site that's managed under contaminated site rules.
Right.
Forward?
So just to give you a quick overview, inside the consent decree, Saint-Gobain was required to do sampling. Inside the consent decree, they've, in 2019, when the standards were lowered, they issued a sampling work plan. And to date, they've issued 17 addenda to that work plan that worked generally from the outside in, from the higher levels of contamination outside. to get the lower levels of contamination. And basically, there's a lot of colors on this map, but the takeaway is that they've offered to sample or have sampled nearly all the properties in Londonderry. There may be a few outstanding ones near the Hudson landfill, but by and large, they've either invited to sample or sampled most of the properties inside the consent decree in Londonderry. One thing I often get a lot of questions from homeowners and Andy Fuller, who's now managing St. Cobain. I managed St. Cobain before I became the administrator. Is my well's below standard, but my neighbor's over standard, and is that common? And the answer is it is very common. And I think this complexity of the distribution of PFOA that we see in groundwater is the result of several factors. One, there's differences in air deposition. So there was a release of the PFAS from the stacks at St. Cobain. And that deposited on the ground differently. There may be other influences such as elevation or different factors that affect the air deposition. Then there's the superficial geology. PFAS have different affinities for sticking to soils. And then there's bedrock geology, and I think there's evidence that certain bedrocks have some influence on what we see in the pattern of PFAS underground in certain locations. And then there's time-related factors such as changes in the types of chemicals released over time, precursor transformation, as well as seasonal variation that could influence what we see and affect this distribution of PFAS at the neighborhood level. Kind of drilling down into just a conceptual model to try and explain, what I'm talking about here. I've got examples of 3 wells. So presumably these wells are all next to each other, got similar levels of air deposition, and the colored arrows represent the concentration in that little legend in the center. So green is below half of our AGQS of 12, and then red is greater than 12. So presumably precipitation falling on that soil becomes contaminated with concentrations of PFOA greater than 12, works its way through, and where the soil is thin, like the well on the left, I think you could find that concentrations entering the shallow bedrock fractures are greater than 12. Whereas the well that's deeper and the water percolating through the soil takes a greater pathway and more of the PFAS tend to sorbed to the soil, you might have an intermediate concentration, maybe below 12, maybe between 9 and 12, as I'm showing in that upper fracture in the center well. And then some deep fractures may not have been impacted by PFAS to any great degree. So you could have a deep fracture that has low concentrations, like that center well has a green deep fracture. And the mixture of water coming out of that well could be below standard, while the bedrock well on the left is above standard because it has shallow fractures connected to the soil that are getting direct recharge with limited attenuation of the PFAS through the soil. And then on the far right side, I'm showing a shallow overburden or dug well, and that in this instance or example is contaminated above standard because it's relatively shallow in the water table. So just trying to give a profile and an example of the complexity that we look at when as hydrogeologists as we're evaluating neighborhoods with PFAS. And the photo on the left is actually a fracture with water pouring into a well bore. So that's a downhole camera taking pictures of water coming through cracks in the rock. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the alternate water remedies that St. Cobain has proposed. So there's 6 alternate water agreements, and we'll provide a PDF, and those links to those agreements, we'll take you right to them if you want to take a look at them. But St. Cobain has proposed to evaluate the potential of waterline extension to 365 properties in Londonderry. Most of those are in the Mayflower Drive area. They are working on a conceptual design or feasibility study that was performed over the winter and spring 2023. We expect to be meeting with St. Cobain in the coming weeks to discuss the results of that. Then they've proposed to connect install 186 point of entry treatment systems in Londonderry. And letters were just recently mailed out to 153 of those property owners to arrange for scheduling of initial inspections by the company that St. Cobain brought on to do this work.
Is the money that we applied for in the state revolving funds going towards that, or is it going towards connections outside the Saint-Gobain
So
consent decree area?
it's doing two things. It is adhering to the no regrets policy that we don't want to have to dig up High Range Road to upsize the water main if and when Londonderry is ready to proceed with expansions to the water system. Secondly, it is, I believe, will facilitate Londonderry, potentially with Pennachuck as a partner, branching out to the east, outside the consent decree area, in an effort to mitigate PFAS in those heavily contaminated neighborhoods.
That are outside the consent
Correct.
decree.
We don't know how many wells that will affect, or how many homes.
I think we do. I mean, in terms of that concentration of contaminated homes in that area, I don't have the count, but you could certainly go through and count them. And again, there are no, Londonderry is certainly not pursuing at the moment a specific effort to build that system out into that area. The first step is to ensure that the supply is adequate coming down from the north, and that pipe is appropriately sized. The second step would be to explore where to go from there.
Right, 8 versus 16.
Correct. Yep.
Excuse me, I believe there was some discussion about bringing a water line from Litchfield to this area. Was there any discussion about that?
I know DES worked with the town of Londonderry to look at some water line options. I'm probably not the person to really address those questions. So maybe after I go through the
Maybe
presentation, we
Brandon,
can circle back to that.
I might know.
So maybe I'll just move on to the next slide. We can revisit that with some of the other folks here. Actually, I guess, Amy, do you want to talk about the PFAS rebate removal?
All right, so the DES in their sampling outside the consent decree area realized that there is a large issue in Londonderry with PFAS contaminated wells. So early last year, like January 2022, we went to the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund and asked for funds to set up a rebate program. It is a statewide rebate program, but it was born mostly out of the issues we were seeing in Londonderry. And so we started that program in August of 2022. It's been very successful. It's a one-time rebate up to $5,000 for the installation of treatment, and then up to $10,000 if people are fortunate enough to have a water main that runs in front of their home that they could connect into, and that's up to $10,000. So what we've seen to date is we've gotten 304 applications from Londonderry alone, and 275 rebates have been issued based on those applications. Just for your knowledge, 50 of them were point of use, 222 of them were point of entry treatment, and then there were 3 service connections, which is good. 2 of them are still under review, but we do have some incomplete applications. We have 6 that are not responding to us, and then 18 that have been denied. And those denials are for various reasons, but some of them, as you can see from that picture on the right, the red X's are the denials. Some of them are inside the consent decree, which makes them not eligible for the program, because the program exists to help those that don't have a third-party assistance. And some of them, I believe they just didn't have an exceedance of one of the 4 PFAS standards. And so that's where we're at today. But to put it into perspective, we have given greater than $1 million to Londonderry residents through the rebate program, and we've, as total, given out $2.5 million. So the majority of what we've already issued in rebates has gone to Londonderry. So it's been successful here, and people are taking advantage of it from this town. And so I do know that the sampling teams are still sampling in Londonderry. We still get requests. So we anticipate more applications into the program. But if anyone has any questions.
So you are accepting additional applications?
Yeah.
The process continues.
Yes, the program is still ongoing. So we have $20 million in the program. So until that funding runs out, we will be statewide giving rebates, yes.
And you've only given out 2.5 approximately.
Yes, yep,
And 1 million came to Londonderry.
1 million,
Okay.
yeah.
Great. How much time do people have in order to get those applications to you?
So, I mean, like I said, we have the funding until the funding runs out. So at this point, we
Got a
have
lot
plenty of
money.
funding.
Yeah.
So anyone that installed treatment after September 30th of 2019 is eligible. So if there are people out there that you've talked to that had installed and don't think they're eligible, they are. So they can still come in. So at any point, people can choose to do it until the funding runs out. So at this point, they have a fair amount of time. They don't have to stress about like quickly getting someone in to put treatment in. They can take their time, do their research, choose an appropriate system for them, for the operation and maintenance and price point and do
great.
that. So, yeah.
Isn't it true that perhaps a lot of them are not able to tap into a municipal line because it's not there? It
Right.
doesn't run by their house. So perhaps a lot of them would prefer to do that, but at this point, they can't.
That could be true.
And the filtration system is a great way to go. Hopefully, it takes all the stuff we're concerned with out. I know they got some really good systems now, so, yeah.
Yeah. We are seeing that carbon is removing it to non-detect. So
The carbon is doing the
It's
job.
Carbon reverse.
it will remove the compounds to non-detect. Yeah.
What exactly does that mean, non-detect?
So non-detect is what the lab can analyze, right? So they can only analyze down to a certain level. And then after that, we don't know 100% for sure what's in there. So that, and I think, Brandon, you can correct me, is it 2 parts per trillion they can go down to?
They can reliably report down to 2,
Yeah.
but they can see if something's above 0.8, I think is usually what I'm seeing, but the number is a little fuzzy between 0.8 and 2.
Okay, so the systems that have been put in to date, that you have to test after the system is put in,
Yes.
they show non-detect, so we can assume that it's less than 2 or less.
0.8 or less, if that's the
Point
actual
point
detection
eight
limit for
or
the lab.
less, okay.
And how about disposal of the filtration, after it's been contaminated? It's got to be disposed of. What is the situation there?
Yeah, so as of today, it's not regulated as a hazardous waste. So it goes into our landfills.
Oh, geez.
Great.
Don't like that.
Paul had a question.
304 have applied. How big's the population that has not applied?
From Londonderry. So what'd you say, there was 550 outside the consent decree?
Is that the way to look at it?
Yeah, approximately 550 outside the consent decree.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So half, roughly half.
And I will
Yeah.
say this may include monitoring wells, so it might not be 100% residential water supply wells in my quick GIS
I'm just
analysis,
looking
but
for
big
kind of
numbers,
a
yeah.
ballpark estimate as to, how much penetration has occurred to date for remediation. Thank you.
So, couple questions. What are you doing to broadcast this? Is this like in the local newspaper to tell people that, I know people know about it, but is it something that's like quarterly? Please don't forget, blah, blah, blah. Is that something?
There was a lot of public outreach when the program was rolled out. I'm not aware of any, recently.
Last fall, right? Are we talking last?
It was in
fall?
August of
September, October?
2022, so last August.
All
Yeah.
right, second question. Is the 20 million just for Londonderry, or is that for the whole state?
It's for the whole state.
Third question.
Yeah.
Do community wells, if like there's 10 houses on the same well, does that qualify?
No. So if it's a public, that would be a public water system.
Okay.
And so they do not qualify.
Okay.
There are other funding opportunities for them, however. So there's the PFAS Remediation Grant and Loan Fund. There is the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And then there is some specific emerging contaminant funds through that SRF that they would also be eligible for. So for that reason,
So Mike, if the water, I mean, do I talk to Mike or Lynn? If the water subcommittee put together like a press release with, and then had it, your office sort of make sure that it looks right, could that be something we could like quarterly, don't forget,
Yep, by all means.
check, don't forget? And
Absolutely.
not every month, obviously,
Yep.
but
Yep,
just to make sure that, you know, there's half the people haven't done it.
yep. I think it's a great idea.
I will make a note.
Well, one thing also is, my understanding is that the remediation is on the private well owner to front the $5,000 or whatever it's gonna cost them, and then apply for a rebate.
yes.
So,
But Martha,
you know,
not
a lot
always.
of people
Yes.
may not
So-
have that money to
We,
spend.
we set it
Martha,
up,
so-
yeah,
Guys,
we set it
Mainline
up in a
Plumbing, for
way.
example, will do that for you. They'll put the money up front for you.
Yeah.
There are companies in town that will put the money up front for you.
Yeah, so we set it up so vendors can also apply on the behalf of their customers for people that can't afford to front the money. And so I would just have them talk to us. We can give them a list of who those vendors are, and so they can contact them and get pricing. But there's, I think, 7 or 8 that, and we've been working with them, and it's been working very well, that apply on the behalf of the homeowners.
Oh,
Yeah, we pay them directly.
yeah, where is that list? I've
Probably on your
haven't
website,
seen
right?
that list.
It's not published anywhere, so, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Great.
I will say that I was one of the 304 that did apply, and the process was seamless, I thought, so.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Worked well. We were
You
one
have
of
a system in your whole house
We
or
have-
in the kitchen?
the whole house, we went with the charcoal system, and the water was tested afterwards, and it came back undetectable, so.
You're in good shape, Lynn.
All right.
So I guess it's worth following up, and, you know, are there plans to do something with these contaminant-laden charcoal filters other than bury them so they can recycle?
I mean, I think some of the, I mean, when the companies come in, the vendor treatment, they'll come in, they'll change it out, they take the carbon and they dispose of it how they do it. It can be incinerated. There are not many incinerators that are accepting PFAS waste at this time. So most of it is going to landfill. So until it is regulated as a hazardous waste, that'll continue to be what's done. I mean, there are technologies that are being developed out there to destroy PFAS, and that can destroy PFAS and carbon. So that will probably be one of the ways that it will get disposed of in the future. But until that hazardous waste designation happens
So when you talk about regulated, you mean by the state or by the feds?
by the feds.
It is a little odd. It really is odd that it's not regulated under RCRA. I mean,
It's new.
it's not that new. It's been
it's not new.
around since, you know,
the
40s,
problem-
The
50s.
remediation process
The problem.
and what to do with it. Okay, can we move on?
I think that's all we had for the formal part of the presentation, so.
Okay, great.
You be able to share these slides with us? We can put it
Yeah,
on
yeah,
our
we could
comments?
send a PDF of the slides.
Great.
It would be good to know if we could speak to the RPMs on the Superfund sites to get a sense as, I mean, either, you know, we could talk to EPA folks or you guys, to know a little bit more about, I mean, I guess we can go to the records of decision and stuff from Superfund sites and look at that information, but it would be useful to know, you know, what PFAS chemicals are in which Superfund sites and whether or not any of the monitoring wells have shown us anything in terms of the plumes moving off-site and what the edge of those plumes are, et cetera.
Actually, I could invite Andy Fuller. He's familiar with the Tinkham Garage Superfund site. He managed that site for a while. So Andy, can you speak to?
Yeah, sure. I can speak a little bit to the federal arena for the sites that are in Londonderry. They're all, I think most federal Superfund sites have screened at least for PFAS to identify whether they're there or not. They're all in kind of different levels, I guess, of characterization. Specific to the Tinkham Garage site, there's been a lot of testing done there. We've got several rounds. That was first tested in the fall of 2018, and since then, we've done at least semi-annual monitoring, if not more frequent, of residential wells and monitoring wells that are on the property there. I can't speak too much to Auburn Road landfill, but I know that they have tested for it there. As far as the plume, because it is still somewhat early, we can't say necessarily things are expanding uncontrollably. Specific to Tinkham Garage, we had it, that expanded out into the residential neighborhood there. The Ross and Tokenville Drive area has been impacted with PFAS, as well as 1,4-dioxane. Part of that expansion, though, too, has to deal with the lowering of the 1,4-dioxane standard in New Hampshire from 3 to 0.32. So we're still investigating that to see whether it is actually expanding. We do continue to have regular, we have detections, and we'll get new exceedances of drinking water standards for PFOA and PFOS in the Ross and Tokenville Drive area, though. So it's still in the remedial investigation phase right there, and we'll be rolling into the feasibility study, so.
Oh, okay, that's Tinkham is
That's
just in
Tinkham
the
Garage, yeah.
RFS stage? Okay.
Excuse me, in regards to the Tinkham site, there are something like 30 monitoring wells on that site, 375 acres.
There's more than 30, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's some new ones that have been put on within the past 2 years that are over 500 parts per trillion. Now, when this stuff falls in the ground, it eventually transfers down and gets into the water. That takes a period of time. But this is still leaching out off-site, okay, which eventually could end up in Beaver Brook.
Yes, eventually.
Okay.
So Tinkham's a little bit different. It wasn't an air release. Mr. Tinkham at his garage had lagoons and septic trenches, and he was dumping residential waste, waste from chemical companies, hazardous waste, tank truck washings, lots of different things. So that's actually, it's somewhat considered, I would consider it more of an older, mature release. But the fact that we, just started investigating it in 2018 as an emerging contaminant means we're still learning about it, I guess.
Okay, but here in the town of Londonderry, we have a lot of different contaminants from, for instance, Auburn Road, Tinkham, and potentially other sites, other than St. Gobans. But we're still dealing with that, okay? And the St. Gobans is part of the problem, but it's not all of the problem that we have to deal with. And this stuff is still leaching out over a period of time, okay? Not only does it go down through the groundwater, it eventually gets into the bedrock, okay? And then it can be pulled off-site, okay? And so this is of concern. Even wells that now are determined to be contaminated, in the future, there could be a lot more coming up that we got to deal with.
Yep.
In the meanwhile, we're looking at putting in municipal water, but that's going to take a while. Even this line we're going to bring down High Range Road, that's not going to happen overnight. Hopefully, it's going to happen soon, but then it's got to be connected to these individual houses. We're talking a number of years, maybe 10 years, before, we're going to have municipal water to the town of Londonderry. So we got a lot of concern. A lot of that's not necessarily your problem.
Well, it is our
Oh, it
concern.
is.
I mean,
Well,
I talk to residents.
we accept any help you
I'm on
can
the
give
phone
us.
all the time. I'm on the phone with EPA. I'm on the phone with residents. We're trying to push to help people, and that's what our objective is, to be protective of human health.
But the EPA does 5-year reports that I'm sure you folks have, probably the town has. Does the town have those reports?
Yes,
The 2019 report from Tinkham?
yes.
Okay, well, I think we need to share that with us so we know what we're dealing with.
Certainly.
And by the way, the Auburn Road site is potentially leaching off contaminants into Coas Brook, which eventually goes to Manchester. Whether or not there's PFOAs, there may potentially other contaminants that the EPA, I think, just recently did a 5-year study on too. So
Yeah, we're fortunate with Tinkham Garage, the EPA RPM I work with. I talk with her regularly. She pushes pretty hard to characterize, and it is kind of pulling in PFAS into the analysis. Sometimes you get other RPMs that may wait until they're told, but she's got our voice, and she understands that New Hampshire has we have the drinking water standard, so like they don't have to necessarily recognize our standard. It's considered an applicable standard, but they don't have a federal MCL, so they listen to what the state has to say, and it's good that we have a good working relationship with them, I guess I'm trying to say. It's not,
Who is they? You
the
referring-
EPA.
EPA.
EPA has their own Superfund RPM staff, remedial project manager staff.
And they're technically the ones that drive the site and make the decisions, and we are the sister agency to them, and, they are fortunate when they listen, but they don't always have to, and we can get in arguments with them, so.
Well, how about discussion?
No, you love EPA.
I told you, we have a wonderful relationship with EPA. We're very fortunate that we have them.
I got a quick
Joy.
question. The 153 people that have received letters in Londonderry, if the EPA rating changes in the midst of them getting their POET systems, has there been any discussion of whether or not it's still going to be 12 or be 4? I'm just wondering if there's been any forethinking as to whether or not the standard would change to 4.
So if the standard changed to 4, we would require Saint-Gobain to address contamination that they're responsible for inside that consent decree down to 4 parts per trillion.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, they have to meet or exceed EPA's regs.
We would have to, by law, adopt that lower standard.
I have one question about that consent decree. I think you said that happened in 2018?
That's correct.
And, I mean, at that point in time, I, for one, didn't know anything about this lawsuit. I happen to be in a home that is probably less than half a mile away from the line of that consent decree, and my well is contaminated. So I'm wondering how they decided on that consent decree. As Ann said earlier, she thinks it was so arbitrary. And I don't know how much testing. I mean, obviously, I was tested after the consent decree was already in place.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said the word arbitrary, because I'm sure it was based on the testing, the water testing that was done. But it was at a certain point in time where we didn't know the full extent of the contamination.
Yeah, I can tell you in 2019, there weren't a lot of samples in Londonderry. In fact, I think that the town was actually quite proactive in that they've they've had a program in town, run by the town, to sample water supply wells for a variety of contaminants prior to PFAS. And in, I think, 2018, they sampled, when they did the townwide sampling, which I think was on the order of maybe 50 to 100 homes, I forget the exact number, but I think most of the data we had from Londonderry was largely from the town sampling their own wells when the standard went into effect. So we had some hint in 2019, after the consent decree was signed, that there were going to be some numbers above our new standard of 12 at the time. But there wasn't a lot of data. Like, all the dots on the map were certainly not there in 2018. The map looked a lot sparser in 2018.
Joey had a question?
Yeah, and it actually piggybacks on Ron. So you just mentioned that within the consent decree, Saint-Gobain will have to treat those wells that are between that 4 and 12. What about, so right now, outside the consent decree, it's that Drinking Water Trust Fund that is, the state has given to those homeowners. Are you guys thinking about going down to the 4, even before the EPA puts that into place? I do know that there are homeowners that are within that range. They tested below the 12, but are above the 4.
Yeah, I think part of the rules, I could have Amy speak to this, but I think the rules of the rebate program specify it has to be above our ambient groundwater quality standard. So if the standard's not 4, they wouldn't be reimbursed at this time until such time that changes.
Yeah, so until the standard changes, it will stay at 12. So we're not, I think your question was, today, can we allow someone above 4 to come into the rebate program? At this time, we are not. It will be the 12. What I can say, though, because we made it retroactive, if someone between 4 and 12 today put in treatment and fronted the money, and then we drop that standard, they can come in at the time that that standard gets dropped and apply for a rebate. And we would consider that and refund it. So
Is DES currently working on your own regs to bring it down to 4, just in case EPAs do get finalized? I'm just
I
wondering
don't-
if anybody at DES is working on that, writing their own.
you want that microphone?
There you go.
Pass the microphone.
There you go.
Thank you. So if EPA makes a new MCL, we will have to adopt that MCL in New Hampshire to maintain our primacy, which is our federal funding to administer a drinking water program. And so what will happen if they adopt it at the end of this year, we would probably have 2 to 3 years to implement it in New Hampshire. And so, yes, we'd be in good position because we already have rules. We just have to change some values and things like that. I will say, don't get too fixated on the 4 parts per trillion. I mean, they asked for comments on a range of values when they posted their proposed MCL. So it could, and they did that historically with arsenic, where they proposed 5, but then they made a final standard of 10. And so
That was under a different administration. The administration's changed. We'll see what happens.
right, but there could be a different administration before 2 to 3 years after
Exactly.
this is adopted. I'm not trying to make any opinions. I'm just
I know.
saying perchlorate was proposed standard 9
yeah.
years ago, and here we are today with no standard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of uncertainty. I wouldn't be too fixated on 4 parts per trillion at the end of the year. A lot of things could happen. We provided comments. Amy Russo coordinated for our agency on their proposed standards, and we could share those with you if anyone's interested in it. And then I do have a few things to say about public water systems when the contamination site discussion. I know I won't take too long because I know this has probably gone pretty long, but
No, that'd be great.
Oh, please.
Oh, one more question?
I have one more, just, I hope it's a quick question. Is there any way, when you're looking at the chemical profiling of the PFOAs, I know you can't test for everything, so it's just a select few that you test for, correct? Can you look at the percentage, like, is there a fingerprint to say, this most likely was from that atmospheric deposition, this was most likely from the, release from the Tinkham site? Is there anything like a profile that you can see when you're looking at those samples?
I think there's a lot of complexity when you're looking at percentages of PFAS because, like I mentioned earlier on, that PFAS have different affinities to stick to the soil. So, if you had a cup that was equal parts PFOA and PFOS and you poured it on the ground, if you measured that as it traveled through the ground, you might find more PFOA relative to PFOS as it moves through. But that being said, I think there are ways that you can look at the PFAS that are present and sometimes differentiate AFFF from, use the example of the tanker spill. We can see where the tanker spill occurred. But admittedly, there are places where you get to the distant ends of that plume where it's hard to differentiate between air deposition and the tanker spill. So there's a lot of complexity there. I've looked very closely at the data on the Saint-Gobain property itself, adjacent to the facility, and I would say that there are multiple fingerprints just on the monitoring wells immediately adjacent to the facility. There's all different percentages of the individual PFAS. So there's no one single Saint-Gobain fingerprint, but I'd say in general, Saint-Gobain's PFAS emissions are dominated by PFOA because that was the chemical they primarily had in their formulations up until about the year 2006. So a lot of PFOA was emitted. So generally a signal that we see elevated PFOA, it's often an indication that Saint-Gobain had a contribution.
Brendan, this is sort of a future question, projection question. I'm wondering whether or not you think that that EPA would consider or have thought about, maybe as part of the interagency committee that they have, using TSCA to essentially ban the ability to ban the production of chemicals. You think the agency would move in that direction?
Well, they've already, through various mechanisms, banned the production of PFOA and PFOS, except for very small exceptions in the United States. They're not in any position to do it for the entire class of PFAS chemicals at this time. That might be something they look at down the line, but they're focused on the long chain compounds at this point. But they have a ways to go. It's a whole nother discussion and going off topic, but we're doing a lot of work trying to find where it's still being released in the environment. And we still can find PFOA and PFOS in cleaning products, not at the concentrations you see in certain manufacturing products or in firefighting foam. And we also see the precursors, so they're not actually the things we regulate, but they could break down to the things we regulate once in the environment. So we have a long way to go. I'm really at the point of focusing on identifying exposure and eliminating it, but source water protection is just at the beginning, getting it out of the chain.
I just asked a question. You mentioned that tanker spill. I thought it was like a gasoline or diesel spill. Was it PFOA? What?
Well, it was some sort of petroleum spill, but I believe to mitigate the risk that AFFF was applied to that spill to mitigate the vapors and prevent
They
a
put foam
fire.
on it?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anything else for this team?
Yes, Chair. Would the department welcome a initiative from the legislature to make the expended filters or any other system that would contain the concentrated PFAS into a regulated contaminant? Is it, do we have to wait for the EPA, or could we act at the state level?
Yeah, that's probably a good question for our Solid Waste Management Bureau, because they currently regulate what landfills. So I can't really answer speak for them or like probably get to the heart of your answer.
So I will say, Mike, so I work with Bob Carey, who's our environmental engineer, and I could pose the question to him and ask if he could raise that up through his contacts in Concord.
Oh,
To see
we
if
got
they-
our-
Comment
we got a
on,
rep right here.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean the rep. I mean the environmental people that he works with, the solid waste.
The
stuff.
solid
Oh, I
waste
see.
people.
Yep.
First step.
so if I
Yeah.
could just comment on the disposal filters, obviously it seems like a bad idea to have this stuff in the environment, collect it, and put it back in the environment. You're not exactly doing that. The filters at least are going to high temperature incineration, which would break it down, or they're going to secure lined landfills where minimal liquid is regenerated from landfill because you have a cap on it, and if it is, it's captured as leachate and can be managed and regulated at that. To require a lot of dollars right now to go into addressing filters doesn't make sense when we have this exposure issue that we're still trying. We know we have damages, and we know we have a long list of problems that need resources, and I think the Department of Justice is working pretty hard at pursuing all that. So it's really a prioritization, and I often try saying I don't disagree with the point, but it's something we need to deal with later at this point. To pour a lot of money into that one area when there's all other sources of PFAS going to the landfill every day. So there's a bigger picture here, and we are trying to get the resources to do it, but right now we're prioritizing what we think is most important with the dollars we have.
Yeah, I could point out to the committee, Vermont did a study on some of the solid waste products going into their landfill where they sampled them for PFAS, and like upholstery of certain used furniture had very high concentration. So I'm not sure, from a mass standpoint that, the spent drinking water disinfection or removal products, might pale in comparison to that. It'd be interesting to look at that Vermont report, might give some insight.
What about the use of firefighting foam? Is that regulated?
Firefighting foam is allowed to be used for emergency purposes for life and safety, but we're trying to avoid the use of that in practice now that it's recognized that it causes significant contamination issues.
Isn't there a better type of foam that potentially does not have PFOAs in it?
There are companies working on fluorine-free foams. I don't know if the military has approved those. There's something called mil-spec foam that's required at federal air bases and whatnot, and that drives a lot of the foam that's used in airplane firefighting. I don't know if that's changed. Have you heard
I
anything about
can't
it?
believe that they aren't working on that. The
I-
DOD is not working on changing the mil specs.
I think they are working on it. but
Yeah.
It's hard, well, they have it in place as a law, it has to be used at those mil specs. I don't think it's been quite approved yet for other types.
I think the PFAS is so effective at firefighting and knocking down fires that I think the replacements aren't as good. So they're trying to balance, I think, public safety and you know, protection of the environment.
Okay, I'd like to move on and give Brandon the microphone.
Thank you. And I can give an abbreviated overview of drinking public water system considerations in town, and perhaps at another meeting, come back with Mike Unger, our senior engineer, who's really the expert in southern New Hampshire and specifically in Londonderry. But there's a lot going on, and there's really a sense of urgency if you want to take action on public water system activities in town to either expand it or connect smaller systems to the existing core system. There's a window of funding for about 3-4 more years, a surge in funding that we've never seen before. That'll probably drop off to levels that were below the surge in funding afterwards. And a lot of it's targeted towards PFAS and emerging contaminants. And so while these are complex issues and it takes a lot of community consensus building to pursue these projects, the window is tight, is what I'm trying to say, for federal funding. And it's probably going to be all the tighter if EPA does come out with a final MCL for PFOA, that is for later this year, because we will double the number of water systems in the state that are going to have exceedances and be seeking these funds. But the time is right for this committee to focus and urgently focus on public water systems. We have the feasibility study coming out in a couple weeks, or soon, I guess. I don't know if it's a couple weeks from St. Cobain. You have your planning study that the town completed with Weston Sampson to conceptualize cost and where the water system could be expanded. And then there's this bigger study occurring for all southern New Hampshire, figuring out, is there enough water? Primarily, does Manchester and Nashua/Pennachuck have enough water for the whole area? And so you're going to have all the parameters on the table that you need. And so it's really going to have to start getting to what does Londonderry want to look like? How do they want to leverage work that St. Cobain might do and these available funds to expand water system to address areas outside the consent decree, to address economic development, or to just have fire protection in certain areas even? You have to make decisions relatively quickly on how you want your water system to look going forward. Do you want to continue to work with Pennachuck or make your own water system, which could have tax saving considerations, but obviously put a lot of burden in initial legal work on your behalf? One area where you can really help advocate for financial assistance is identifying systems in your town that, and they don't even have to exceed our standard necessarily, but that would qualify them higher in our rankings, that might be considered disadvantaged. Small communities that are either isolated or have below average median household income. It just raises their priority for getting financial assistance. So
Does that have to be done by census block?
it can be done by a system base. You can do a water survey of the actual system. So if it's a condominium association or a mobile home park, you can actually just survey the residents separately. But you can use census blocks, but that's usually not as granular.
Yeah.
So we are doing a lot of work right now in Londonderry. There's 5 systems that are getting assistance from one program or another to address PFAS, 2 that have considerations for where we provided extra funding so they could do the no regret policy, upside piping as they expand and connect to nearby systems. So if other connections come on, that they can take advantage of it. I haven't seen your application. I'm sure my colleague, Jonna McKenna, has, but I think it's a really good idea that the town applied for the High Range project. That's definitely a no regret project. And the legislature is looking forward to your point, Mr. Breslin, water coming from Litchfield across from the river. There's a bill, Senate Bill 169, that proposes to fund $9 to $10 million to bring more water to southern New Hampshire from Nashua. There's enough water in Nashua, but not enough ways to get it here. And Manchester has enough water now, but has a lot of future commitments. And so this water line would not only help potentially Londonderry, but also Hudson, Wyndham, Pell, and Plastow. That bill has made it through the House. It's made it through the Policy Committee in the Senate and is with the Finance Committee in the Senate. And I'm not sure if they're going to act on it, roll it into the overall budget, or do nothing with it at this point. But we'll know in a few weeks what their intention is.
Do you guys happen to know which state senator sponsored it?
I'm not sure who the lead was, but I can readily find that for you.
I think Senator Carson was at least a co-sponsor.
Sure, I hope so.
Who was the co-sponsor?
Carson.
I kind of like the idea of it coming through Litchfield because it could take care of the people that are most impacted to the west of the Descent Creek. And I believe Pennachuck has already put water lines into Litchfield, right?
They have water lines, but there would be new transmission lines needed to meet the supply demand and for Londonderry's build out. So they would have to put in additional piping. But there is, yeah, they definitely have a crossing in Litchfield and are serving the contaminated wells there.
Yeah, which also services, they also service Hudson, I believe, and even part of Londonderry.
Yes, Hudson has 3 wells located in Litchfield. 2 are contaminated, so they are getting water from Pennachuck at this point and are looking at a long-term option for their water supply if they're going to continue using the remaining well or not. Water could come from Manchester as well, but there'd be upgrades required there, and booster stations and things like that. And then there's a question about Manchester's capacity given their future commitments, where this is part of that Southern New Hampshire study where there's plenty of water is the sort of the outcome of the study, but you might have to trade off where Pennachuck serves water and where Manchester serves water to make sure the water gets to the right places. Again, this could be a topic of a future meeting. I think it would be good for Mike Unger to come here and really point out, options for the town to enhance ongoing efforts by Saint-Gobain and others to advance public water supply development in the town, and start helping you guys look at what are some decision points, what are some things you could start talking about. Do you want to bring forward to the community or not? And then these other actions, such as do you want to form your own water system or not? But again, ideally this would be over a 10-year period, but the funding crunch is real, and also the regulations may change in the near future.
I have another question, and that is, we got 5 million gallons sitting up in North Londonderry, and there's supposed to be a 30-inch line connected to that to bring it down to Rockingham Road, okay? All of the water that we're getting currently, municipal water, either from Manchester or from Pennachuck, comes from Lake Massabesic, okay? And a lot of that water is traveling through Londonderry and going to Derry, Wyndham, Plastow, Hampstead, and potentially others. And in the meanwhile, we got a problem with fire protection in the town of Londonderry, but that's not your problem. It's our problem. I'm wondering if you folks know anything about this 30-inch line.
I can't speak to what you're mentioning. Mike Unger would know more. Your water supply planning study would outline what you have and what you could have, and so I would point you back to the planning study.
Well, this is between Manchester Water and the Southern New Hampshire water system, because when they fired up the pump station in Derry to send it south, the fire protection in Londonderry went to crap. That's the need of this 30-inch line. So, Mike Unger, I guess, is the guy to talk to, right?
Right, and it may even help to scope out before he comes here, what do you want to focus on? Because we can talk about certain lines, we can talk about the big picture. I mean, we probably want to really frame how we want the discussion to go, but I would encourage that meeting to occur.
Is there a goal or a move within DES to, since you have so many people in New Hampshire, and it sounds like particularly in southern New Hampshire that are on the private wells, to at least make a move, and especially since we have the opportunity of all this funding coming through, to try to put people on municipal water and get people off the wells?
So that's a great question. A lot of this funding that we have from the federal government, private well owners aren't eligible for it. Per Congress, the statutes, it's for public water systems. To Senator Jean Shaheen's credit, she's pushing really hard to expand in our ability to use those funds to help private well owners. We can only sample
Even
private
to
wells with
connect.
these federal dollars if we believe there's a reasonable chance they're going to connect to a water system. But otherwise, we cannot do a statewide sampling analysis and just sample them at no cost. That's where the state funds have come in through Amy Russo's program.
Okay. But is there a move, say, within your commissioner, and somebody said, listen, we've got to really get all these people who are on private wells, because it's not just PFAS. I mean, we know that there are other contaminants in our private wells. And is there a move to say, we've got to get into, 2023 and 2025, and get people off the private wells and get them onto municipal water?
I think wherever we're doing a project that's looking at contamination issues, our first choice to mitigate that, if it's feasible, would be to connect them to a water system, because it takes care of all water quality parameters, and then the long-term testing and operation and maintenance. It's just not the cost, it's the logistics of actually getting in there. And if those commitments to access and test and respond to the results fall apart, the exposure starts to occur again, where a water system always has to test. So it is our preference, but half the state's on a private well, and for a large part of the state, because of density of development, geology, topography, just political opinion on my water. I don't want someone had to pay for water. That it won't happen in some areas, but it is our preference to go that direction where it's viable.
I can answer the question about the Senate Bill 169 that you guys asked about. So Senator Carson is the primary sponsor. Senator Birdsell and Senator Susi are co-sponsors. On the House side, I'm a co-sponsor, Bill Boyd and Doug Thomas. Those are the co-sponsors on that bill.
Super, thanks.
Any question? Oh,
Real quick, so if, and again, not advocating this, just asking for my education, if Londonderry was gonna build our own water system, roughly, do you have sort of a budgetary number of that cost? Is that like a $5 million project or a $50 million project? I have no idea.
Keep going.
I know infrastructure is hugely expensive.
Well, I mean, the first discussion would be, are you buying the existing system from the existing owner, or are you just gonna build a new system that buys wholesale water from them? Some of the planning analysis for Weston Sampson shows things like $10 million for the river crossing. That wouldn't just be for Londonderry, it's for all of southern New Hampshire. It shows things like a $20 million in a transmission line and connections to certain homes.
Yeah,
outside. So you're talking potentially tens of millions of dollars, but you can break it off and do some no regret things too, where you'd be foolish not to pursue it while the funding's available, and that you would be paying again to dig up the road and again to put in another pipe. So there's different ways to go about it. You can break it down into pieces and kind of do what everyone can buy into, or look bigger, which will take more groundwork probably to get
Okay,
support for.
so building the system, it's, at the end of the day, that's just money. I mean, money is tough to get, but it's just a matter of capital invested. Do we in the area, is there water that we could tap into if we had the ability to clean and transmit and all that infrastructure? Is there water that we could get our hands on that we could say that, drop a pump into the Merrimack? And I'm guessing, I'm not recommending, that there's a place where we could get our hands on water without getting somebody else's. Where does the water originally come from? Is that someplace? Is that someplace?
I mean,
Do you understand my question?
Yeah,
Again,
you could have
drink
a-
it from a fire hose, and I apologize if I'm asking questions that.
You could have a blank sheet of paper and build yourself a sustaining water system, and build your own treatment plant, your own pipes and your own tanks. The more feasible way would be to buy wholesale water from Pennachuck or Manchester.
Got it.
Manchester's water coming from Lake Massabesic, and also soon the Merrimack River. Pennachuck's coming from the Merrimack River. Any analysis would probably show building your own treatment plant would not be the most feasible option.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
do you have any questions for us? I think
I just have a couple
the
more.
last question.
I was wondering, if DES gave some consideration to expanding, opening up the consent decree and expanding the consent decree boundaries? That was my first question. And what is, I'm sure it's a political question, but I'm curious as to whether or not that there have been internal discussions within DES to do that.
So I think, the consent decree is between two parties,
Right.
the state and St. Cobain. So I think while we would like to see expansion of the consent decree boundary, I don't think St. Cobain really has any interest in expanding that.
But what happens if some, you guys go to EPA and EPA says, well, we can work with you guys. We can develop another consent decree or expand this and open this up. Has there been any sort of consideration to bring in other parties to the consent decree, or have EPA issue a consent decree on a portion that's not under your consent decree?
Yeah, the EPA was not a party to this
They did
consent
not.
decree, so it wouldn't apply, for federal. But I'm not going to comment any further.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Okay, any questions of us that we can answer?
No, thank you.
One other question while Amy's there. I got something in the mail said that I was in 500 feet of a contaminated well. Does that entitle me to have free testing?
Yes,
It does.
yes. So
Okay.
call the number on the letter. And
What letter?
did you get it?
just
Did
got
you?
You said you got
Just say you got a letter?
Yeah, but I can't find the letter.
Okay.
Call Amy.
You can go on the website and request sampling. If you need help with that, you know how to get a hold of me. You can call me tomorrow and I will help you. I will help you get
Oh,
on the
thank
list.
you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
So I'd like to,
Just one more thing.
absolutely.
If you're going to be doing a news blast on the rebate program, St. Cobain has recently agreed to start their own reimbursement program for people that had already put in filters. I know there's only probably a handful of homeowners that fall into that category if they're within the consent decree area and they've already installed a filter, but they're supposed to be having a program go live on July 1st. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I don't, it's a private company working on their own details, but it's probably something that would be beneficial to have in that, any sort of announcement if you worked it up for people.
Yeah, I'm sure Mike will be well aware of that, and we'll craft it accordingly.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent information. I think we all agree that it was great to have you here. I think we all learned a lot.
Appreciate your overtime.
Yeah, definitely
Great, thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And don't choke on the wildfire smoke on your way home.
And with that, moving on. Next item on the agenda is just our administrative committee work. Our April minutes, we did not have those available at our last meeting, at our May meeting. I know everybody's had a chance to take a look at them. All the edits that I received went in. They were incorporated by Kirby. So if I could have a motion to approve the April minutes, I would accept that.
So moved.
Second. Third.
So, motion by Jeff, second by Ann. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the April minutes are approved. The May minutes, Kirby's been working on those. We've been taxing Kirby. She's she's been helping us out while we're getting our secretary situation squared away. So I don't have those for us tonight, the draft minutes. I'll be getting those out. She told me she'd have them for me tomorrow. So we'll get them out and we'll vote on them at our next meeting. I had asked Mike to join us. Mike, you're always welcome, but come in and give us just your view on where we're at with water in Londonderry. So I'd like,
Sure.
where you're
Thank you.
at.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would echo a lot of what was just gone over. We met, the Assistant Town Manager and I, with DES the commissioner, and I think pretty much everybody who was here at the beginning of May, and discussed, again, a lot of what you heard just now, that there's a lot of money coming online, that there are some things, some very reasonable things that Londonderry can do. And I think there was consensus that a stepwise approach is probably the right approach. As far as sort of the Cadillac version of a water system, if Londonderry wanted to do it, the number that I think that Weston and Sampson came up with was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think that is a likely scenario. That's pretty much if you wanted to bring water everywhere where it's feasible to bring water in town. And you don't do that overnight if you're going to do it at all.
We can at least bring it to folks who have private wells.
That's right. I mean, I think that, there have to be, cost considerations that go into this. The map that you saw really highlights the importance of, I think, bringing water to a lot of the center of town. Across the street from the people who we've just heard have been taken care of through the consent decree. I view that as the low-hanging fruit here because you already have an expansion of the supply going past that area as part of Saint-Gobain fulfilling its obligations under the consent decree, upsizing that pipe, making sure that it's sufficient to branch out to the east to serve those contaminated neighborhoods. There is an issue here that I think DES is conscious of and that we're conscious of, and that is you saw all of those green dots, which indicate folks who have installed POET systems in their residences. And, there is a cost to homeowners entailed with connecting to a public water system. I can't envision a situation where DES or Londonderry would be paying for the individual connection to go from the curb to the home. Convincing people who have already had their wells remediated to pay that price to hook up to a public water system is a concern. And I think that there's to your point, a public kind of messaging component to this to make sure that people understand that yes, when you hook up to a water system, it comes with a water bill. However,
people are going to say, how much is it? What is it?
Right. I think it's important to, and we could forecast. There are models that can forecast what that number is, and what that number is likely to be in the future. And there's the cost of service study that we're looking at, which I'll come to in a minute. But making sure that people understand that, sure, it is the case that you have to pay for water that comes to you through a public water system. But the cost of either maintaining a POET system or just having a well and doing what you should be doing with it anyway is not insignificant. And to make sure that people understand that so that they can really make that decision if and when public water goes past their house. I think that, the next step, as I said, is to, one, assuming that there is an award either through SRF and or through the trust fund, to support this $2 million pipe upsizing project. The next step is to try to tap into some of this money that is going to be available for this short period of time to branch out into those areas not too far off of High Range Road to the east in those kind of that contaminated center of town that you saw. And as I said, I think there's consensus both from the town staff and the DES staff that this is the path forward. There are two separate tracks here. One is tapping into that federal money and taking advantage of this unusual window that we have in an effort to mitigate PFAS in this area. The separate track is to make informed decisions about what Londonderry should be doing with respect to a water system, if anything, going forward. And there is that cost of service study that is being paid for out of a warrant article that passed on the prior ballot, and the cost of which is being defrayed by a strategic planning grant that we got from DES to do that. As I reported on at a recent town council meeting, you know, the projection is, and it's a projection, that, you know, it may make sense for Londonderry to go into the water business. It may not, but there is at least something to talk about there and something to look at further. That's, as I said, on a separate track, and I don't think we should wait for that decision to be made before we, you know, do what we're going to do, as I said, to try to access that money in the immediate term. So that is what's happening as far as I see it with regard to water. We did retain Weston and Sampson, who has done a lot of the feasibility work for DES and has helped us, because frankly, we're at the point where we need sort of on-call engineering assistance. And Weston and Sampson has been very helpful in putting together the SRF application and in kind of coordinating what different communities are doing on this. Because, you know, other communities are making the same decisions that we're making right now. Hudson, I think, is a lot farther along. You know, they sort of were where we are now 10 years ago, is my understanding. But certainly Litchfield is looking at this and making some decisions. And then, as I think you pointed out, Mr. Breslin, there are points south and east that are also looking to take advantage of some of this money, but also to expand public water, access to, you know, public water going forward. We met recently with Pennachuck, and Pennachuck was aware of the cost of service study. Weston and Sampson had been, you know, discussing with them along the way, you know, getting information about the cost of the infrastructure, the Pennachuck infrastructure in Londonderry. But, you know, they became aware that we were close to a final report from Weston and Sampson. And, you know, we had a good discussion. I think that they have, you know, as I have said before, Pennachuck is a uniquely structured corporate entity. They have a pretty dispersed areas that they serve, and they are, they have a shareholder, which is the city of Nashua, and that corporate structure actually puts them at something of a disadvantage in terms of their ability to, you know, price water competitively. They really are at a disadvantage, and that's something that we were aware of as we were going through a recent rate case with Pennachuck. And that becomes very complex, and there are numerous ways in which they're disadvantaged. But it was illuminating for us to hear that from them, some of the challenges that they face, and how, you know, one option here would be to continue to partner with Pennachuck to try to do what we want to do in a way that is as competitive as possible in terms of pricing, because they're cognizant of these issues. Productive meeting there. As I said, SRF application is in, and it will be followed by a trust fund application. And, you know, there are differences between how awards are made through the trust fund and through SRF. But we're certainly hoping to get as much as we can from those two sources to complete this first step, as I would phrase it.
I'm sort of wondering if, when you guys go and meet with DES folks, Commissioner, or you go meet with, say, with Jeannie or Maggie or Chris Pactus, or you go meet with Pennachuck, whether it wouldn't be useful to have a few representatives from this group go with you. One, so that we know a little bit more about what's going on and the various ins and outs. Like, for instance, I'm sort of thinking, you guys did the application and trust fund, and maybe there could have been some assistance or help from this group to at least review or provide some kind of suggestions for those applications. And it might just increase the communication a little bit between what the town offices are doing and what this town committee is doing.
Sure. I certainly welcome that, that kind of cooperation. I will say that the path forward here with respect to this no regrets pipe was, pretty strongly suggested to us by DES. And these SRF applications, only happen once a year. And so it was important that we get that application in timely.
Yeah.
So Mike, this trust fund application is for $4 million for the 16-inch line coming down High Range Road?
It is $2 million, which is, we feel, a conservative estimate of what it will cost to make what Saint-Gobain is proposing to be an 8-inch pipe, a 16-inch pipe, approximately 1 mile down High Range Road.
Is there an 8-inch pipe now?
No, so Saint-Gobain is extending the main down High Range Road from where it currently ends in order to connect to those 300 residences within the consent decree area.
Well, that's a proposal. That's
It is. I would call it more than a proposal. It is they're legally required to do it. They have proposed to DES to connect the approximately 300 residences within the consent decree area to public water. And there is currently a design that Penachuk is doing to effectuate that. DES has said, yes, we are in agreement that these 300 residences should be connected to public water. And so it is going to happen. They are obligated to do it under the consent decree.
But we're contributing 2 million towards it if we get this money?
No, I wouldn't characterize it as we're contributing $2 million towards it. Well, yes, with a clarifier, which is that Saint-Gobain has to do this anyway. But in order to do what they have to do, they only need an 8-inch pipe. We want to make sure that it's a 16-inch pipe so that we can do what we want to do outside the consent decree area, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. But once again, what I brought up earlier in regards to potentially, there's been discussion about bringing a water line from Penachuk through Litchfield to the consent decree, which is the people that are most impacted at this time. And we really don't know what the status is of that.
The status is, it's going through the political process. It's an important bill. DES feels that it's an important bill. I think we believe it's an important bill because there is a long-term supply issue here that, we shouldn't lose sight of.
Sharon Carson is the one that brought this up. Has she discussed that with you?
I haven't had the opportunity to discuss it directly with Senator Carson. But what I could tell you is that we believe that this is an important bill. We believe it has, and I would defer to Representative Dunn, a very good chance of making it through the process.
So far, it's passed the House, it's passed the Senate, it's in finance. So finance just has to, finance is like the fourth branch of government.
Right.
They have to finance the bill. If they finance the bill, then it comes back to us, we sign off, we basically give a verbal approval, the Senate does, and then the governor signs.
This bill, is this line coming through Litchfield?
Yes.
Well, it's not it's to get the water
Yeah.
to the east side of the river.
Exactly.
Mr. President, it is important to note that there's additional work to be done from that point to get the water into Londonderry.
Right.
And there are significant
gets it
legal
across the
and
river.
engineering decisions and issues that need to be sorted.
With all due respect, I think we need to know that. We need to know where that's at.
Well, if you're referring to the water crossing, I think we do know where.
You can't really know where it is until it's approved.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not approved yet, so I can't tell you where it's gonna be, because
Well,
I don't know, if the finance committee decides not to fund it, then it's not gonna happen at all. You know what I'm saying, Ray? So, we've all approved it through the process,
Yeah.
but if it doesn't get funding, it's not gonna happen. So it's hard for me to tell you where it's gonna be if it's not funded. It's not gonna be anywhere. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So if it gets funded, then I can say, hey, Ray, we got it approved today, governor signed it this date, it's gonna be here. But it's hard for us to tell him where it's gonna be
Right.
right now, because it's
Right.
not financed.
But I think Ray is saying, where are the plans for it, though? Is there a sketch or an outline of what the plans would be if it was financed? I mean, in order for the finance folks and for you guys to approve the bills,
Okay,
there must
well,
have been some
maybe I
description.
misunderstood
That
what
makes sense.
Sharon Carson
Right.
said, but,
Well, I would have, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
Go
cut you off.
go ahead.
I said, I would have meant to your point, Ms. Fenn, I would have,
You
I
don't
would,
have to call me Ms. Finn. You can just call me Ann. It's okay.
I would imagine that, that this has been costed out the same way that we costed out the pipe, for instance. You know, pipe costs so much per linear foot, and I know that in the past, DES has relied on Weston and Sampson to provide some of that information. Of course, it's a projection and it's a snapshot in time, but I'm imagining that the number, the $10 million number, comes from something like that process.
I think you were more focused on the location, right? Rather than the cost of the pipes, as to where the pipes would actually go.
Well, I want to know about both of them,
Okay.
okay? And how they're going to react, okay? I mean, all of these are going to connect together eventually, okay?
I hope.
That's the way they work. And I think the more we know, the better.
Yep.
As soon
Well,
as
we
I know
should
something,
know-
Ray, I'll communicate it to you.
Huh?
How's that? As soon as I know something, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll let the whole committee know.
Let the whole
I'll
committee know.
I'll let every, yeah, just.
And I'm sure once the engineering study is complete, we can make that publicly available, and that should have a lot of.
Yes. I mean, we have a lot of studies that are coming through in the next several months. The cost of service study, there was a reference to the Southern New Hampshire study. So we're getting a lot of data fast, and I think that my message would be let's take it stepwise. Let's make sure that we understand what has to happen first, and at the top of that list is the supply. Where is the water coming from? Is the pipe as big as it needs to be? And I think that not losing sight of what steps 2, 3, and 4 are, but kind of taking it that way.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's easy to get overwhelmed with all this information coming through.
Absolutely.
Correct. And I think that, in some of the prior discussions, it was, well, do you want a $400 million water system or not? And I think that, we need to just understand that even if you wanted a $400 million water system, it doesn't come into being overnight.
Mike, in regards to the Weston Sampson study that has been done, that was kind of conceptual.
Yes,
That
correct.
wasn't an engineering study, right?
It wasn't
That
a
wasn't-
design, correct.
That wasn't a cost study or an engineering study. Is that in the process?
So my understanding of what happened was, so I agree with what you just said with a clarifier, which is that, yes, so there were engineering determinations that had to be made, such as, elevations and where you might need a tank or a tower, right? So there was engineering work that went into that study. And there was engineering judgment that went into that study. However, you're exactly correct. It was not a design. There was cost information included in that. And my understanding of what was happening at the time was, there was again, there was a lot of money, infrastructure money, sort of, that potentially was floating around. There was a budget surplus that ultimately was put to a different use. And so I think that the department wanted to understand what certain parts of this project would cost if a budget surplus were available to pay for that. And that's where that $50 million number came from that was, bounced around at the end of the last budget season. Ultimately, the budget surplus was not earmarked for this purpose. But I think that that's where, this $400 million number came from. It was sort of like, if money were no object, right, what would the system look like, and how would it be broken up in terms of cost, so that political decisions could be made about, and budgetary decisions could be made about how to apportion potentially available resources.
Okay, so the engineering study has not been done, the conceptual study has been done, and there are some cost figures that have been looked at.
Right. It
sounds like there's a lot more work to be done.
There's a lot more work to be done. I mean, I wouldn't quite characterize it as it's either an engineering study or it's not an engineering study. It was a feasibility study, right?
Right.
There was engineering that was done to produce that result. But we have not designed a town-wide water system. We don't have drawings or anything like that.
Right.
But we have that study from Mike Unger.
The Weston and Sampson study.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Is this Roy F. Weston, originally Roy F. Weston? Do you know?
I don't know. I'm not sure of the origins.
Okay. So you said there was a 50 million budget surplus?
I think the budget surplus was potentially larger than that, if memory serves, but
Is this state
At the
budget
state.
surplus? Or
Correct.
not here?
No.
so this is, I
not
want to
in
be clear,
town.
not this
We are
cycle.
doing
This
pretty
was,
well. If we had a
correct.
50
So
million budget surplus,
we're going,
my ears perked
Yeah.
right up. But
yeah,
of
so
New Hampshire.
we're going back like a year and a half.
Right.
Is what I was discussing. And, yeah, there was a pretty healthy budget surplus, and the political process played out, right?
Right.
And so you've got a lot of different kind of processes that are running along side by side. One of those is the political process in Concord that I don't understand. It has its own unique features. And trying to marry that up to our timeline and then the available federal funding, it can be difficult. And that's why I really emphasize we just need to go baby step by baby step by baby step.
Yeah.
I've got another question. Does the town of Londonderry have a groundwater protection ordinance? Which was,
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that there are features of our zoning ordinance that
what?
We have an aquifer protection ordinance. I think that's what it's called, or maybe it's called groundwater
Well-
protection ordinance.
well-
Groundwater
Yeah,
protection
it is
ordinance,
groundwater.
When Colleen, how'd you pronounce her last?
Malou,
Malou?
Malou.
Was here, she brought this forward and recommended to the planning board that they set up a groundwater protection ordinance, going by the state recommendation. I'm just wondering whether that was put in place or not, because it is important.
I agree it's important. I can't speak to, I don't have that information here tonight. I can certainly look into it and get you an answer. But I'm sure the planning board would be happy to consider that kind of an ordinance.
I think
Oh,
they did,
Yeah,
right?
it's been worked.
passed.
It's been worked. I don't know if it's been adopted by the town council, but it has been worked.
Well,
So,
go ahead.
So Mike had a question. I want to say we have a lot on the agenda to go tonight. And I know all these are important topics, but once again, some baby steps, I think.
Just a request, can we get the PDFs of the feasibility study and the previous study you referred to, just so we can get them on our utility committee website, so if people want to study them, they could get at them without traipsing into town hall and
Absolutely,
bugging you guys.
absolutely.
As soon as these studies and things like that become available to the public, I would like to put them on the website
By all means.
and
I
certainly
think
have
it
them
would be
in
good to
one
put
location.
the original, the consent decree up there so that those folks are in the consent decree. I mean, they can't always go to DES, but if you're in Londonderry.
Well, it's
resident,
on the DS website, but it
Yeah.
would be good to either
Get
put a
into
link.
a link.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
On
we
our
should put a
website.
link to it,
I think
yeah.
it's a good idea.
That will be the ideal situation. Okay, anything else, Mike?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Sorry to move us along, but like I say, we have a lot of things to go tonight, so I'd like to continue on down the agenda. The next on my list are londonderry.org and londonderrynh.org email addresses. Has everybody looked at setting up themselves up with their londonderrynh.org email address? Because that's what I'm using exclusively at this point in time.
Oh,
And I'm not sending any more email out to private email addresses because of the nature of the work we do. I want it to be available in the public domain like that. So if you're not getting email, let me know. But if you're not checking your email, then do that first, please.
Who do we see to get that resolved?
So Kirby Brown.
Thank you.
So I have my email address,
Yep.
but you're saying setting up,
Well,
what
set
are you
up,
talking about?
are you using it?
No, as a matter of fact, I'm not.
Then you're not going to get any more email. Okay? No,
That's why I didn't get your email.
exactly.
So Ray,
How do you get on it?
I can help you with that, or it comes down
Use
to
the web
Kirby.
browser.
It's easy.
do what?
Just a web browser.
So
Send you one.
I will.
It's easy.
Give
to
us
do.
a
Again,
101.
Once again, I will put out, just so everybody's aware, once again, I'll put out instructions on how to set your web browser up so that you can access it.
Will you send that to our private
Private email?
addresses?
I will. Okay.
Thank you for
But
those.
we as a committee have to get our act together and doing some of these things.
Technologically,
No,
yes.
well, in terms of working in the public domain as well.
Yes, yes, I agree.
So,
Okay.
Martha and Paul, I can tell you, yours aren't working because when I send you stuff, either you don't get it or you only get it on your personal. So
Right.
you need to talk to Kirby.
Yeah, I've talked to the IT department too. I don't know what's wrong.
we can make it happen.
All right, well, I've been trying very
Well,
hard.
that's good, that's good, but
you,
we got to make it happen, okay? And with that said, with Mike here, I had proposed we'd establish some subcommittees at our last meeting, and one of the things that I had hoped for was that the subcommittees would allow us to be a little more agile in how we're doing business. And we've gotten word back from our legal team on the town, and we have to treat the subcommittees the same way we treat a regular committee in terms of when you do meet, putting out a notice with an agenda, and then following the meeting up with minutes.
Oy, oy, oy.
Yep. But
Even
with
if we
that said-
don't meet a quorum, even if it's under 3 people?
If it's a quorum of the subcommittee,
Yep.
it needs to be noticed.
We're a subcommittee, I mean, I don't think it,
So I
but we're
think
only
that's,
3 people.
so I think that sounds worse than it really needs to sound.
Correct.
No. So I put together a template for a meeting agenda. And I put together a template for minutes. And it's just a simple matter saying, we're meeting at 10:30 at Reading Room A in the library on July 12th, right? And here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to
Right.
talk about solid waste.
And who do we give that
And
to
that
Mike or
goes to
Kirby?
That
or-
goes to Kirby, and Kirby will post it.
Oh, okay, so anytime our subcommittee meets, we need to do that?
Yep,
And it needs to be posted 24 hours before the meeting.
yep.
Okay.
Can I ask why is that necessary?
To comply with 91A.
But 91A is right to know, right?
The
Isn't
subcommittees are considered a public body,
That's right.
91A, and as it's considered a public body, this is what we have to do.
Yeah, but we don't have a quorum. That's what I don't
No,
understand.
you have a quorum of your subcommittee. the subcommittee, in the terms, in the eyes of our legal advisors, the subcommittee is a committee and is in of itself.
So is this in the town charter?
No, it's in RSA 91A. So 91A has both access to public records provisions, and it has provisions that talk about noticing and keeping records of meetings of public bodies. And as the chairman pointed out, a subcommittee of the Utilities Committee is a public body and needs to comply with all of those provisions.
Okay.
Here's what I'm thinking is I'll tell you what I do. I mean, I meet with others other than this committee, okay?
Which is fine.
Right, but they're not members of this body.
Yeah, which is fine.
Which is fine,
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
Because I'm going to be meeting with other towns, I'm going to be meeting
that's
with
fine.
other
No problem. No problem.
Concord, so I can do that. I mean, I'll report back to you what I find.
But that does not meet the definition of a public body
Okay.
in the eyes
So-
of 91A.
So if the three of us meet at the library,
Yep.
we have to keep minutes?
So the minutes would say,
We met.
we met, the three of us met, we talked about X, Y, and Z.
Okay, it doesn't have to be word for word.
No, we're not
Absolutely
doing
not.
verbatim minutes for this.
Oh, okay.
committee either,
No.
so We're not doing
No.
verbatim minutes.
If action is taken, if you are, deciding as a subcommittee to recommend action or to, finalize a draft of something, the minute should reflect who made the motion to recommend it and who seconded it and what the vote was.
Yeah, I mean, we're strictly advisory. I mean, we're not really making any decisions.
Unfortunately, the right to know statute is not necessarily adapted to how local agencies do business. But the law is fairly clear that the public is entitled to know when subcommittees of committees are meeting so that the public can attend if they want to. And I can't say I disagree with that.
So I have a template for minutes, I have a template for the agenda. I had talked at our last meeting about putting out a rules of procedure for our committee. I have done a draft that I sent to the vice chairman and to Mr. Malaguti for their input. I do plan on getting that out to the full committee for everybody's review. The two templates will be a part of that, so you'll have the document in hand. And yeah, I understand I'm not happy about adding some bureaucracy to how we operate, but I understand exactly where our legal
Yeah.
team is coming from.
It's just that, sometimes doing things as informally as possible, sometimes you get more done.
That was what I had hoped to do.
Sometimes bureaucracy slows things down.
That's
Yes, it does, but that's the way it goes, right?
So,
One question. If there were no formal subcommittees, how would it work?
Probably this committee would have to.
So,
Yeah, if we call it a team.
well, I don't, it might have been possible to get off on a different foot, right? But unfortunately, we had a discussion, we talked about creating subcommittees. I don't think going back and recharacterizing them as something else is advisable at this point in time. But the answer is that, sure, informal groups of less than a quorum of a public body can meet without noticing it and without keeping minutes, and they can discuss agency or public body business. But I think that under these circumstances, we need to treat these as subcommittees and comply with that statute.
So if I send an email to the other two members of the subcommittee that I'm on, that's way more than a quorum of that subcommittee, right? So I can't do that.
Unfortunately, I think that's correct.
So it's going to be difficult
So does
setting
it
up
all
a
go
meeting.
back up to Lynn and then back
oh,
down?
so,
or-
no.
So we have to meet in person then to communicate with each other?
Well, let me elaborate on that. So what you can't have is a meeting via email. So understand that there needs to be very strict compliance with what I'm about to say, because it does create the potential for problems. However, it is not, in my view, in and of itself, improper for a member, for information to be shared with a quorum of a subcommittee. The problem is if somebody responds. The problem is if you have a contemporaneous or nearly or sequential communications that are discussing subcommittee business. So if the chairman sends out to all of you something, the feasibility study, for instance. If I sent the chairman the feasibility study that we've been discussing, and he sends it to everybody and says, we're going to be discussing this tonight at the meeting. This is for your information. That's fine. First of all, it's a public record. It can be accessed by the public, but it is not a 91A violation because it's not a quorum of the committee either having contemporaneous or nearly contemporaneous communications, 2, having sequential communications that together equate to a meeting, or 3, it's not being done to violate the spirit or the purpose of the right to know law, which is its own violation. So I don't believe there's a problem with sending information in that way. But you can see how it can quickly become a problem if there are responses.
Unless we keep the emails and just give you guys copies of all the emails going back and forth, so people can
That
see those.
doesn't work.
But if I send all the members of the subcommittee, 3 people, an email that said, let's get together on Wednesday, can you make it?
That's just fine.
And if they respond back, we've had a sequential exchange.
So-
No, I can't make Wednesday, how about Thursday?
You're not convening, a quorum of the subcommittee under those circumstances is not convening for the purpose of deciding or deliberating upon
Yeah.
a matter over which they have jurisdiction. They're just discussing scheduling. That's perfectly fine. But I would encourage that, I would just caution that, you can see how you can easily have a conversation develop. You can see how it's easy to reply substantively, and then you have a problem.
So, in regards to a telephone conversation, somebody's out of the area, but you want to have a discussion, you can't do that.
You can, as long as a quorum of the committee or the subcommittee isn't on that call.
2 people,
Which is a
Two
people is a quorum.
yes?
That's, I believe, is the law. Yes.
It's okay.
How many people are on the subcommittees? 3?
And we can
So they have a
add,
Constitutes a meeting.
Yep.
no, the
Yep.
intent's not to have people not talk to each other. I mean, that's why we're here, is to talk to each other and,
That's most important.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I mean, let me just,
Can I
we're
suggest,
trying, in good faith to make sure that we comply with this very important law. And, I attended a town council meeting last night where we spent like an hour talking about whether the town was doing what it needed to be doing in regards to 91A. Take it from me, you want to err on the side of public, complying with the statute, because if you don't, you can be assured that the public is going to have a problem with it,
and they should.
and they
I
should.
guess I'm wondering, you said at least 24, if we have a subcommittee meeting, we should at least put out a notice 24 hours. I mean, if we're serious about wanting public input and wanting people to see this and potentially come to the meeting, then I would suggest we put it out, a week in advance so that people can really take advantage of the meeting that we have. I mean, I don't think we don't want to give any type of impression anyway that there's anything that's happening.
That's right.
that people shouldn't be involved with.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's the perception issue that you raised, but there's also we might learn something issue from
Oh, that's
somebody who
right.
shows up. And I
Yeah.
think that's exactly the right way to look at it.
Yep, and just to talk to the 24 hours versus a longer notice, personally, I strive to give a week's notice when I send out an agenda, but things happen, and, you know, certainly the 24 hours is the deadline that you work to.
Yep.
But, you know, earlier than that, as soon as you know what you want to talk about, you put it out.
Okay.
So the good news and the bad news is, the good news is, I think we need to do this because I think the law says we need to do this, and I think it's the right thing to do for what, for the work that we're doing.
to us.
Yeah, so, when I get home, or tomorrow, won't be when I get home tonight, tomorrow, I'm gonna send out the draft rules of procedure, the templates will be, and it'll talk about doing just that, sending out an agenda and recording minutes, and the templates for both documents will be attached to the rules of procedure.
Sounds good.
Get that, take a look at it, give me your feedback. We'll have a final draft available at our next meeting.
So can I summarize real quick?
Yep.
We can't have, we have to notify the meetings. We have to use our email, the town emails. We do not want to have discussions on email, but we can do scheduling on email. And,
We
you
need
know,
minutes.
we need minutes. And you're sending us a template.
Yep.
Okay.
And just my personal experience with the email meetings is you don't want to say, what's your opinion? This is what I think about this issue. Things like that's where you start getting into trouble, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
When you start giving your opinion or trying to sway opinion of what the subcommittee is working on. If it's just like Mike says, you know, let's meet Wednesday night, can you do it? No.
Well,
you get the
email.
And this, you're talking about in an email.
Yeah.
Well, in any medium. I mean, understand that if the same applies for text messages, right? If it's possible to create governmental records by text.
Oh, yeah.
So the same principles that the chairman just went over apply. It doesn't matter what the medium is. It doesn't matter if it's Telegram. It doesn't matter if it's smoke signal. Smoke
but-
signal's a bad example, but, you know.
If you're meeting face to face with somebody, you're having a discussion, you're going to discuss things, you're going to have opinions, yes?
But we
Yes,
shouldn't have them until we get together and have our meeting.
at a properly noticed meeting,
Include them in the notes,
correct.
summary in the meeting notes. Duct tape, Ray. Duct
What's that?
tape. Duct tape.
Oh, I thought you were
They
telling
are
me,
Okay.
I thought you were telling me to smile.
Okay, moving on.
Please do.
We talked last month about a Facebook page. Jeff, you had looked at doing
Yeah, the
something?
Facebook page has been created. I poached one of my, or maybe not Mike's, but I poached the city's, I think it was the city's logo or a picture from the city. I sent it to Lynn and I sent the notification to most people's email. I believe their Londonderry email. I will double check to make, I think it was like an invite to be a member or something like that. I'll double check it when I get back to the house, or not back to the house, but I'm getting a shaking head. Did you not see it?
Yeah,
or-
and I didn't get it.
Okay, well, when you check on your Facebook, just look at Londonderry Utilities Commission.
Okay.
And there's a group, or I think it's a group is what they call it, or an
It's a group.
organization.
It's a group.
Yeah. I think I created an organization. And I believe I gave Lynn access to edit admin privileges. Do I need to give someone in your office that, Michael? Or?
Not unless you need us to, or going to be relying on us to. I think that if there's two people on the committee who can do it, that's probably sufficient. But if it turns out along the way that you want us to be able to
Perfect.
put something up, we're happy to.
All right, I will resend invites. Just so, and again, you can just,
You can go on it, though.
yeah, you can
Yeah.
just Google Londonderry Utilities Commission. I know at least Lynn has been on it, and a couple people may have been on it. But I'll double check it. I have a question. What kind of things do we want to have on there? I believe I put some notes, what I did post was just a news article that was in the local newspaper. I specifically didn't want to start throwing stuff up there because wanted to make sure that I wasn't stepping on I wasn't doing anything improper. But I guess maybe it's a Mike question. What can we put on there? And I guess I could look at other committees.
Any public document, right? Think of public
Yes. So, you know, the issues that arise with social media, so government social media, and it's the same issues that apply to our Facebook pages. It's a public forum. And so the same rules that apply out in the town square apply in that electronic public forum. And so you don't want to be moderating in a way that deprives people of their free speech. I don't think we moderate I'm not aware of us moderating or curating in any way our town Facebook page. Maybe if somebody's up there, posting profanity or something obscene, then yeah, we would take that down and that's fine. But you really can't shut off comments. You can't do anything like that. So just stay away from that. But in terms of what to put up, I think that I guess I would want to make sure that the committee, to the extent that you're speaking for the committee understands that you're speaking for the committee.
Yep.
And so something like that, I don't think people would perceive as, he's saying something on behalf of the committee that's substantive, it's informational. But if somebody's putting something up that says the Utilities Committee believes X, I think that probably should go through some kind of a formal process.
Perfect. All right, so I'll just, anything that's from the Utilities Committee, we'll discuss it here, and we'll have language approved by this committee.
A reminder about the PFAS remediation program rebates.
Yeah, that's going to be
perfect.
we talked about putting a news release out, we'll get some language
But
together.
that's the type of thing that would be perfect for that.
Perfect, great, okay.
This power plant up that we just saw?
Yep.
Yep.
The PowerPoint was great, actually.
And as always, if it becomes unmanageable, we stop. That easy as that.
I just wanted to make one point along these lines, that I think that any one of us has to be responsible when we're in a public setting, like if we're before town council, to be careful not to say that they may personally support a particular energy project as representative of the Utilities Committee, because that doesn't mean that the whole Utilities Committee officially is supportive of a particular energy project.
Yep,
And I
absolutely,
think we have to be really careful on that,
absolutely.
not to step out ahead of our other members here.
And it's the same thing, Ann, if you're talking with somebody in Concord, you don't represent yourself as speaking for the committee.
Right, right,
So you can certainly identify yourself as a member, but you're not speaking for it.
yeah.
So if you're speaking at a town council meeting, for instance, and you say, I'm speaking as a taxpayer and a citizen,
You're fine. I mean, members of any public body have the same First Amendment rights that the
Yeah.
public have.
okay,
Yes.
yeah.
And, we're not talking about something that's illegal here. I think we're talking about something that, as a courtesy to make sure that the board is not perceived as one way or the other.
Right, yeah.
Those are the stakes.
Yep, and the decisions we make, we make those decisions in public and we put them forward as a decision by the committee, not by one individual person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, subcommittee discussions. So this is where I thought we'd get into the meat of the work that we're going to be doing. I have each of the different subcommittees listed here. I wanted to go down just one by one. If there's anything to talk about, let's talk about it. If there's nothing to talk about, we don't talk about it. But I know I had energy listed first. I know we've had a number of energy topics over the last month. I don't know if, who would like to talk to the Energy Committee? Mike, I don't know if you'd like to. Some of the-
Yeah, I can certainly start, and then you guys can chime in. So I spent a lot of time trying to unravel the mysteries of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, which I believe Justin has thrown our hat in the ring.
Yes.
And I don't know if he's, I haven't heard anything from him. Has he gotten a reply saying, good, you're in the game, or?
I would assume so. I don't know. I could certainly find out from him.
Yeah, maybe he could keep us in the
Yeah.
loop on what he's getting. So it is quite complicated, so I'll try to make this as simple as I can, and maybe we want to definitely put it down on writing later, but there are really two programs under this grant. One is for states and large cities. There's about 9 New Hampshire cities that fall into this category that are in what's called the competitive program. So if you see, that's not us. We're in the one that's just automatically distributed. So the amount that we are eligible to get, I think it was 54,000, is, that's what it is. All we got to do is basically justify how to spend it. It's all towns, basically it's all towns. And I think that was how they divided it up, even though there are some cities that are smaller than Londonderry in population. Because we're a town, we got thrown into that pot, which is probably a good thing because it's kind of simplifies the process. So the two decisions that I think we need to make with regard to that, first, they've really gone out of their way to make it simple for small fry like us by creating templates and sort of canned programs. We still have a wide choice, but you have two options. You can apply for a voucher, which is almost like a blank check, or you can apply for a competitive grant where it's a much more involved process. So I think what we want to do is go after the voucher because it's really, in the big scheme of things, $54,000 isn't all that much, you know. So that's one decision that, you know, that we would want, I think, as a committee to endorse, that, yeah, we want to go for the voucher. Now, there are probably something like 13 different categories of things that you can do, from, you know, setting up a solar installation to setting up EV charging stations, you know, the whole gamut. The first one of which is coming up with a energy efficiency conservation strategy. So there are, in order to do anything other than that one, you have to have that strategy. So there's a sort of an incentive to just go with, you know, option number one. My initial thought was, well, let's do something that's tangible so that we can, you know, show the residents, you know, there's really something happening here. Look, these, plug in your EV here because we did it with this grant. But I think probably because we're in our infancy here in Londonderry in terms of energy efficiency conservation, we probably ought to, you know, go forward with that strategy grant. Now, having said that, I want to disclose that it is possible they have a template that you can, it's almost like a check the boxes that we could fill out and sort of say, okay, we got our strategy in, and that would allow us to do some of these other things. And we have a year from the time we submit an application to actually get that strategy in. But I'm not real sure where we'll be in a year from now. So if we move at the pace of the meeting tonight, you know, it might be a while. So
I think we should just check the box, and then we can actually do what you said in terms of show people or establish. I mean, if it's getting the solar panels on the fire station, North Station working and generating energy, and there's been so much discussion about that, or if it's buying some EV police cars. Maybe we can buy 2 EV police cars for the town. It would be nice to actually do something, as you said, where we can say we made some use, rather than another study. I mean, there are so many studies and planning. We spend so much time planning. When are we gonna do?
Are we suggesting to spend it all on one thing?
No, and we can put it,
No, yeah,
I'm
and we
just saying, let's do the checkoff
we
strategy.
can do more than one thing, but I sort of, I mean, that was my first reaction too, Ann. But then the more I thought about it, you know, it's almost like what we talked about with the water, or we're doing a bunch of studies right now because we got to get this right. And I think working at and they'll offer us help through the national labs, actually, you know, working one-on-one with us. So we could
The DOE.
probably get, DOE,
DOE's
probably
national
get
labs?
more value out of it than the dollar amount that we get by getting some of this sort of free professional help. So, you know, I guess I'm leaning toward doing that first category of coming up with a plan. And within that, there are many different activities. So it's not like we have to do them all, but we could set up, say, monitoring, building monitoring, or we could look at identifying low and middle income consumers of electricity. I mean, there's, again, a vast array of things we could do that I think, they aren't going to be tangible in the sense that you can plug your EV into it, but they will be things that you can publicize and identify. It says, here's what we're going to do. I mean, we have to somehow, decide among all these things, what are we going to do? I don't think we ever got a chance to look at that vision thing that I drafted early on, but, we ought to have a vision, and, it's something about taking care of the people in Londonderry. And if we're going to do that, we ought to have a kind of a strategy with some goals and how we want to go about doing that. And getting, I think this would be a matter of, hiring some consultants or engineers, depending on what we want to do, to make it happen. And so maybe what we should do is maybe at the next meeting, come up with two options. One being this sort of a plan, and another being more of a hardware-oriented thing. And then the committee could kind of sort of weigh the pros and cons of each. What I'm struggling with is figuring out, which of those we would do, or maybe it'd be better just to let everybody look at the different categories. But I mean, there's literally, within these 13 categories, there are probably hundreds of tasks. So, how do you go about choosing? And my answer to that is, well, you have a strategy, so you know how to go about choosing.
Well, what I would hope for is that the Energy Subcommittee would come back to us in a month with your recommendations.
Right.
So that's what I was hoping for. I think if we get into the 10 of us, we're all going to have 10 different opinions, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, I think it should be the energy guys steering the ship on this thing, but I'd just like to say that, we want to do something for the town of Londonderry. And what do we want to do? Potentially, we want to save the money, okay? And how can we do something economical, or to save money, that people are going to be thrilled at? You know what I mean? Like, we're doing a good job, we're coming up with some great ideas, and potentially what we're doing maybe is going to save some money. You mentioned about building monitoring, and that is important for sure. We're already doing some of that.
Yeah, we are.
And
Some of that.
maybe that should be part of it, but it's up to you guys on the Energy Committee.
But that's what I really like. That's what I'm really hoping that we're going to get out of these subcommittees, is that you can take that more defined look or more detailed look and come back to us and say, this is what we think because of X, Y, and Z.
I wanted to just kind of lay out what the program looked like, so you see what we're up against.
Well, I
The
would,
one thing that I could not find in all this reading was a due date. Unless you did, Paul. I couldn't find anything that said the application has to go in such time. It's not there that I can see. But I think we can just press ahead, and
Was there a
sort it in.
contact on there, a DOE contact?
It's
Did you
just a
just
very
call 'em?
generic DOE contract,
Email?
one for all, 260 70 million of us. so.
Right, right.
I think, in my experience, there isn't always a due date for some of these things. It's unsettling not knowing when when it might potentially be, but there's at least one other grant that we're working on right now that doesn't have a defined due date either.
I mean, I'm
However,
not
best to
complaining.
put your oar in the water sooner
Yeah,
versus
oh,
later.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another advantage of if we go to these, I don't think I even got into the fact that within all these categories are blueprints. So the blueprints are another fill in the blank thing that makes it really easy. And within those blueprints, there are activities. And, so, we'll try to drill down and show you how we got to where we got to. But, we'll just, sign up for one or two of those and, try to get the most value for the money that we've got.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Just
because
fair minus.
54,000 is not that much money.
Well, I was gonna say 54,000 is not
To do a stud-
500,000.
Right, right.
I thought it was 74,000.
54.
That's still not-
Maybe
Huh?
58, I thought it was 50.
74,900, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
We'll get you the number.
Can we refer that back to the subcommittee?
We'll get you the number.
Come back to us in July?
We'll get you the number.
Okay, great.
Other than, on a subcommittee for utility, there was a presentation last night.
Yes.
I assume that's something you'd want us to look at or be part of, or there's a discussion, are they gonna make a presentation next month? Is that?
So Paul, I had a conversation with Sean Downey after the meeting last night. And Sean and I had talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago. And I extended the invitation to him and his organization to come and talk to us in July.
Okay.
And he's going to go over the presentation that he presented to the council last night. Plus, I said, I think we really want to get a good look at permitting, timelines, and where you stand with that as well.
Can I also ask, because he mentioned Citizens Energy as part of that project, and it would be useful to have somebody from Citizens Energy there. That's, I happen to know of that organization and who started it. But it would be useful to have those guys there too and explain their involvement and their integration in that project.
Sure.
And the likelihood that we could take advantage of it.
Right.
'Cause I think we're short on disadvantaged communities, and that's, I don't know how, that's why I was asking how granular the water study could be, because if it's small enough, then we should be able to find some low-income areas. But if,
Oh, I think in this town, you'd be amazed.
Yeah.
You'd be amazed.
To just amplify the point that you made, Mr. Chairman, the takeaway from last night that I heard was this is a competitive process. They are one of two potential projects. They may not even be the project selected. And so I think, I would just echo what the chairman said is, I don't think there's a need to rush necessarily this committee's consideration of that particular project.
The timeline, he talked last night was 2026. When I talked to him on the phone 2 weeks ago, it was 2027. So it's not next
They're
month.
very, 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 very early in the stages here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And for those who
Now-
followed Northern Pass,
Yes.
that,
And
took
and I'll
forever and
share
went
with the
nowhere.
committee, everything is negotiable.
if I may, because it's on the, we're still on the electric. Did I remember seeing that you're getting Freedom Logistics to come in here?
As well.
And when, is that's
July.
next meeting?
Yep.
Okay. And because a question for Mike, we have our hands are tied with Freedom Logistics, so we're dealing with a vendor that has a non-compete agreement with us, basically. It's a non-communication agreement, but to me, it's almost a restraint of trade. I don't know, if you'd ever win in court with that argument. But what I would like to do is propose to Freedom Logistics that we be allowed to talk to alternative vendors. To
So-
include things like, the Community Power Coalition, New Hampshire Community Power Coalition, or others, But, you know, right now, we have a gag order basically on ourselves.
I don't view it as that restrictive. It's been a while since I've looked at the language, but if memory serves, what it says is during the term of the consulting agreement with Freedom, Londonderry shall not
I think work with was.
do a community power project with another entity. I don't believe that it, I'm not persuaded that it necessarily prevents us from talking with other potential community power outfits. You could certainly have that conversation with Freedom, but the provision says what the provision says, and I don't necessarily believe it restricts us from doing that. Remember, the purpose of the consulting agreement is to do a lot of the work preparatory to actually doing a specific community power plan. So there really is a trigger that we haven't gotten to yet that I think would sort of set us off on the path of actually doing a community power project, either with Freedom or with somebody else. We're in an earlier stage, I think. And, you know, there is no obligation under the existing consulting agreement to do a community aggregation program with Freedom. It's basically an agreement that they're going to consult with us during the rulemaking process, during the regulatory process, and we may decide to enter into a new agreement to actually, you know, do that. And their services, the fee for their services would be baked into that separate agreement.
Isn't there a termination clause in there, too?
Yes, there is.
You know what the term is?
6 months
6 months.
for convenience, yes.
Five-year agreement, they're in the third year.
I believe that's yep, exactly.
I read it.
Yep.
And I believe you're correct, there's no exclusivity. However, if we go off on our own, they get a share of the pie.
Right.
So,
That's
way I
how I
read
read
the
it too.
Yep.
Yeah. But their share of the pie is paid by whoever. That's what they say.
So I think we can have a really good conversation with them in July. And I think, you know, come prepared with some questions, you know, do a little bit of homework before they do come. From what I've read, is it's, you know, a program, a community aggregation program actually is something that would benefit could benefit the taxpayers, and I think it's something we need to look at. And if there is a benefit to the taxpayers, we should look at it sooner than later.
Can
But,
we circulate that agreement to everybody that's on this committee?
I believe I sent it out to your londonderrynh.org email address.
Didn't get it.
And just bear in mind that, you know, without getting into the substance of this, it really, you know, it's not an agreement to do community power with Freedom forever.
Right.
And so, you know, consider not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good here, and you know, starting down that path.
Yep, I like that. So they're going to be here in July as well. A couple of other items. We had a couple of solar proposals kicking around, and I know, Mike, you asked a question about one of them, but I don't know, where do we want to go with these solar proposals, where people want to come in and build on town property and?
I'm getting flooded with them. And I'm getting calls, I'm getting just solicitations, and some of them, the property is plainly inappropriate for what they want to do. So I don't know, I get the impression that somebody sits in an office somewhere and identifies, you know, parcels that look appetizing, and then calls the town manager. So I'll be perfectly honest with you, I certainly do not prioritize getting back to those entities. I just don't have the bandwidth right now.
I think ideally we could come up, what I would like to see is that we come up with just like, these don't make sense, we're not going to pay attention to them. Or they don't make sense right now for the next 12 months, we're just not going to pay attention to them. As opposed to looking at every one that comes in, because like you say, they just seem to be rolling in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, there have been serious discussions about like the Auburn Road site. I think those discussions are potentially different.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're talking about much smaller parcels, not just solar fields and solar arrays, but also storage,
Yeah,
which
battery
is kind of
storage.
interesting.
Yeah.
But I agree, it feels like we're chasing our tails a little bit.
The problem with these is that they're all, it's a problem for me, maybe not for others. What they all envision is just leasing town land. And then it's gonna be their equipment, their cash flow, their profit. The good news is, there's no risk to the town that way. The bad news is, we're leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah,
And so, I guess my categorical response would be, we're not interested in just leasing land to you. And if you want to
Unless
talk
we
about
get
something
something
else,
back.
Yeah.
we would listen. But, because, and I looked at some of them, the escalations are 1 or 2% a year.
yeah.
And, electricity's going up, 5, 6, 10, 20, 50% a year. So it just, it doesn't make any sense. And I think as long as it's cash positive, we could assume a little more risk.
Yeah, I've worked on a lot of these projects from the finance side, on the banking side, and the way that I've seen towns do that is they negotiate for gross points. So say it's, and I'm just gonna make some numbers up, say it's $10 million of revenue for energy on day one or year one. You say the town wants 5%. And one of the key things is, and I've seen towns get burnt by this, is you always want the gross points instead of the net points. Because if you do gross points, it's, $0, you're getting paid.
Right.
Instead of at the end, I've seen utility companies, they'll just start piling on costs. Oh, we had to do this maintenance. Oh, we had to do this service. Oh, we had to do that. And then all of a sudden, there's zero profit.
Yeah, right.
Like for instance, Forrest Gump never made many money, theoretically. The Empire Strikes Back, the third Star Wars movie, never made any money, according to the studios. So you always want to have $1 stuff. And I've seen that work, and I've helped negotiate those sort of things. But it's, like you said, everything's negotiable.
About a half a dozen ways to structure these.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Third-party financing to purchase power agreements.
Yep.
To buyouts, to whatever, and the escalation year after year is a factor, but the starting point is the bigger factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can even set them up to where it's sort of a project finance structure where they build the project and then after 20 years, we own the project.
Right.
If you negotiate that, that's kind of cool. But then after 20 years, there's a lot of maintenance and they'll defer
Or I
maintenance.
negotiated a deal where I have a buyout option from 6 year and every year thereafter at a certain price.
Yeah, yeah. There's a million things.
So then if the price of electricity 8 years from now is to the advantage, you trigger it.
Mine, yeah. But I guarantee the first thing they send you on a cold call is not going to be the best thing that you can negotiate.
Yeah, right.
No, and we have to look at the parcels too, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Some of them are not really feasible.
Right, and then there's the, kind of the balance, do we, open space, are there conservation resources? Like, you could really drill down on this quite a bit.
Yeah.
Kind of a shame, we got the second biggest power plant in the state of New Hampshire, that when it was originally built, we were guaranteed cheap electricity. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
No.
That was our fault.
So, Mike, what would you like us to do with these proposals as you receive them?
I don't have a strong preference, but I guess my input is I'm really not doing anything to process them or review them at this point because it's not with all of my other duties, it's not something that my office is able to handle right now.
Do you want us to take a look at them?
I'm happy to send them along, and then what you do with them is fine
I'd
with
be
me.
happy to take a look at it.
Great.
Okay, so why don't you keep sending them to me? I'll fan them out as we get them.
Fantastic. Thank you.
The last item I had for the Energy Subcommittee was, I got an email regarding the New Hampshire Saves Program. And they're looking at rebates for energy efficient washing machines and appliances and things like that.
Do you want to ask about
I don't know what we want to do with that information. I think it might be something good to put on our Facebook page.
it? We
Yeah.
need to
Just
talk
have
to New
people
Hampshire
go off
Department
and
of
take a look at it on
Environmental
their
Services.
own.
Makes
So-
sense to me.
One thing they do is they will take old appliances back at
Yeah,
various
but we can-
locations
we can-
around
we can
town and
contact
give you a
I
$30
mean,
rebate check.
Oh,
So
If
they
they
don't
have a
have to
meeting,
pay
I'll
to
do
get rid of
it
it.
anyway.
Yeah. So,
Was that the meeting that we were gonna go to that I got?
so we'll put that, we'll put that on,
perfect.
on the Facebook.
I can show you the information. You can. I mean, huh? Sorry, I'm sorry.
Moving on to the Water Subcommittee, we talked a lot about water tonight. Do we have anything else that we want to go through on water?
Met once at the library, and we basically, fill in, guys, we basically discussed information and information sources and how to get information. And I would say we shared a lot of information. And I think that the feeling was, let's find out what's going on from DES, let's find out what's going on from EPA, let's find out what's going on with Mike and legislatively what our congressional delegation is doing. So I think right now we're sort of talking about let's gather as much information as we can and then figure out what our next steps are.
One thing that we did that came out to me that was, I don't know if concerning, but it's something I want to get smarter about, is the buried tanks.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there was quite a
that
few
was
buried tanks in town, and we had a
was
list.
Actually,
And the more you read, the more it became a concern.
it was leaking underground.
Yeah.
I mean, we couldn't tell if they were still leaking or whether or not they were contained and somebody had dealt with them.
So we,
I think we need to talk to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services about that, because they would know.
yeah, we don't have the data right now to say that this is a problem, but there's a lot of tanks, and it's something that I at least am starting to look into.
Tanks
so
like
it's-
fuel tanks at a gas station?
Fuel
Yeah.
tanks.
Okay.
Buried tank, yeah. So it's something
All
that
over
it's,
the
yeah,
town.
there's
It had to
tons
be
of them.
25, 30, and it's a
I think you'll
leaking
probably
underground
find that
storage
most
tanks.
of them have been taken out and new tanks
We'll
put in.
find out.
That's what I think
find
too.
out,
They've had to meet the
And we
EPA
did-
requirement
Yeah.
for
attended the state meeting,
storage tanks.
Yeah,
How'd you get that information?
I went to
It's
the
in a report.
What meeting?
groundwater and drinking water trust fund meetings, which anybody can go to. They actually do have public comment if you have questions at the end, which I've spoken at occasionally. And what did we learn? Well, we learned that a private development, in other words, it's Colonial Village off Mammoth Road.
That's one of the smaller community water systems that's trying to connect to the Pennachuck system.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
which basically has been approved, okay? They went themselves because they can, you know, and applied for it.
Two went. Two went, two condominium associations in Londonderry.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but this particular one, and thinking smartly, they also put in, they wanted to put in like a 12-inch line, and they said, why don't we put in a larger line? Because this potentially is going to be feeding other places along the way. It's like 5,000 feet long, it's almost a mile long, okay? And so, they took the initiative to make out the application to get it, because their well was either contaminated or insufficient or whatever. And so, they took initiative to do that, you know. And it was, I don't know, it was a substantial amount of money. I think it was like $4 million, you know? And there are other ones, like Century Village, that also, I believe, is going to be putting in the municipal water to them because their well is contaminated. So a lot of this is going to be taking place, you know? Eventually, when municipal water comes down High Range Road or wherever it's going to be coming from, then potentially the feeders going off to these individual neighborhoods will take place. But, you know, this is not going to happen overnight.
Right.
Some of it is going to take place because the people have taken the initiative to apply for it. I mean, why not apply for the money that's available? And, I mean, that's something we really need to look at. And we can, Mike can share the information with, you know, what the town has done, you know, so we're not,
Duplicating.
thank you. Sometimes I struggle with the words. So, yeah.
Cool. Anything else from the Water Committee?
Let me see.
While you're looking, so sewer, nothing to discuss. Joy and I have talked about getting together with John Trotter and the town engineers just to start getting a better understanding of what the sewer plan looks like, the infrastructure plan. Cable internet, nothing there, and nothing also on oil, propane, or natural gas as far as I know.
So, yeah, getting back to water.
Yep.
Which I brought up earlier when the folks was here from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. This 30-inch line up in North Londonderry, it needs to be connected. It's in the works, but where it's at, we really don't know.
I don't quite understand what you meant by 30-inch line. I mean, I'm thinking 30 inches, that doesn't seem that long.
That's big, that's big, yeah. There's 5 million gallons sitting up in North Londonderry, okay?
Yeah.
It's a 3 million gallon tank, a 2 million gallon tank.
How long's that water been sitting there? I mean,
It's not the same water.
1722, or, I mean, what are we?
No,
Okay.
it is connected, it is connected and being drawn off maybe right now, okay?
Okay,
It goes down to the water line on Rockingham Road, okay?
okay,
Okay. Now, that water is traveling from Manchester, from Manchester Water, Pennachuck,
Oh.
I'm sorry, Massabesic,
oh, Massabesic, okay,
okay?
yeah,
So these tanks are connected to this line on Rockingham Road that goes to Derry, that goes to Wyndham, that goes to Salem, that goes to Hampstead, Atkinson, and Plastow, and potentially is going to be connected to others. The trouble is,
doesn't,
we got a little problem
it doesn't
here
give us any.
because with all that water heading south, we're starving here, okay? Now, what I mean by that is we don't have sufficient fire protection. Part of the problem is, on Mammoth Road,
Sufficient fire protection?
what?
I mean, I'm confused by sufficient fire protection. We don't
What-
have enough water for firemen to put out fires?
No. So the fire protection refers very specifically to areas of town that are covered by fire hydrants.
Okay.
We have other strategies that our fire department deploys to put out fires where there are not fire hydrants.
Or-
Obviously, if money were no object, you would have a fire hydrant every 10 feet, but that's not the case in Londonderry.
Okay, so the reason they need a 30-inch line is because they need additional volume to be sending down south. And they have a pump station over in Derry. And when they started that up to send the water south, the pressure in Londonderry went dangerously low. Okay? So, in order to fix that, they need to put this 30-inch line in. Okay? Now, that's been in discussion, it's been in the works. Where it's at, we don't know. Now, I say insufficient fire protection because on Mammoth Road, potentially right here, can potentially a problem. Coas Landing, which is down at the head of Mammoth Road, where the gas station is, right there. There's an 8-inch line. There's about a mile of 8-inch line, okay? Then it goes to a 16-inch line that comes up here to the schools, to the fire department, to the police department, here. It also goes down Pillsbury Road and goes over to Woodmont, Gilchrist Road, all of that. That 16-inch line, that 8-inch line needs to be replaced with a 16-inch line. I say that, I'm not an engineer, but I can show you the engineering reports that says that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's part of the water situation that we should be asking questions about. What is the status of it?
Let's ask the question.
Hmm?
Let's ask the question. Yeah, what's the action we can take, right?
Well, I think we need to talk to the town, we need to talk to the engineering department and see what the status is. I mean, I think it's up to them to ask the questions as to should this be addressed or should it not?
Yes. I don't know what the engineering department would say about this, but as a reminder, this is a Pennachuck-owned system that Pennachuck is responsible for maintaining and ensuring that it is sufficient to do what it's supposed to do. So this is not a town-led effort to necessarily upsize pipes that Pennachuck may view as sufficient. I don't know if Pennachuck has identified this as a problem. It sounds like maybe somebody has at least. And, you know, I think that Pennachuck probably makes decisions the way that we do, apportioning limited resources where they're most urgently needed. And that may account for why this line hasn't been upsized. But I don't have enough familiarity with this specific issue that you're raising to talk about it intelligently tonight.
Well, I think it is of concern. It's a safety concern. And you say it's a Pennachuck decision whether they do it or not. I would suggest that we, the town, should have input because if it's a health and safety issue, we should be able to suggest that it should be addressed.
Yes, I agree with that. But bear in mind that Pennachuck is a regulated utility and that comes with certain obligations to make sure that health and safety issues are addressed. And so I would want better information about what exactly is going on here.
Well, I'll gladly share you the engineering. One was done by Pennachuck they hired their own engineering, and the other one was done by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Both of them identified it as a problem.
Can you share those studies with me, Ray? And
Certainly.
then I'll get them out to the committee. And then we'll take a look at what that is. I think the biggest thing in a question like that is, you know, determining when there is a problem, right? I mean, it's one thing to identify it, it's another thing to fund it, and it's a third thing to build it. And let's identify it, let's see
Yeah,
what it says.
and
Let's
some of
take
these
step
things,
number one.
some of these things potentially doesn't necessarily have to go, the burden onto the taxpayers, because potentially there may be some federal money available to address it.
Right. Yeah.
So are you suggesting that the town put some pressure on Pennachuck
I'm
to?
suggesting, and
change
wait a
the
minute,
size?
this was brought up at a town council meeting.
Yes, I
And,
remember.
and,
you
and
said-
John Farrell agreed that that should take place, that we should have Manchester Water, Pennachuck come in. There should be a discussion. These things should be brought up and discussed. I think that should take place, but then again, I'm just suggesting that. I don't,
No, I was at that meeting, and he did say that.
I don't have any power here.
Well, I guess my question is, since you've read the reports, I'm just kind of curious, is there anything in those reports, Pennachuck's own report, that says, we should get this done by such and such a time, or these are gonna be the consequences and results if we don't do this by such
Well,
and such a
just,
date?
just for instance, in Pennachuck's own master plan, it identifies that they do not have sufficient fire protection for full build-out without both the water tank and other infrastructure, meaning piping and so forth. That's part of the reason they're gonna be building a water tank up off Hovey Road, by the cemetery, Spring Road, to supply water volume
For
and
Woodbine.
pressure. They're gonna be running a 16-inch line down through the Appalachian to a pump station to provide sufficient fire protection for what they're building out, because they don't have it now.
All of this will be in the studies you're gonna circulate to us, correct?
Sure.
All right, let's take a look at it then.
Yep, and and I think it might be appropriate to invite Pennachuck at a later meeting.
Take a look at the
Let's have a
study.
discussion.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, I'd rather hear directly from them.
Yeah, let's get the answers from the source.
Yep. Good. Anything else, Ray?
No, I'm suggesting that that the
Okay,
town,
moving on.
moving on.
Moving on. So I don't think we have any updates on the grant process or grant status. Roundtable discussion. Anybody have any last comments? We'll start with Joy.
Nope.
Paul?
No, I just raised a comment about last night's presentation, that's all. I'm all set.
Okay, Ann?
I'm fine.
Martha?
Fine.
Good?
Good.
Ray?
I've already said too much.
Got a quick suggestion for you, Mike. Is there any way we could get the subcommittees on the utility committee website so the public could see who they are?
Absolutely.
So since we're gonna be doing possibly 91A issues, at least everybody will identify who's on the subcommittee.
Yep.
It'll be public knowledge.
That's a good suggestion.
I just pulled up the committee website. It's not on there.
I got it down.
Okay, next meeting. So our next regularly scheduled meeting would be on July 4th.
What?
So,
Perfect.
yeah, and so I, for one, don't want to be here on a holiday
I'd like to
evening.
move to change the meeting,
To what day?
any day other than
All
July
30.
4th.
So when I did the straw poll a few months ago about what a good day is for the committee to meet, the third Thursday, I think it's the third Thursday, was the second best date. And that is July 20th. So I'd like to make a proposal that we have our meeting on July 20th as opposed to July 4th.
I'll
long as
make
the
a
budget
motion
committee-
to change the meeting to July
Wait a
20th.
minute, he may have a meeting.
No, I want to just check and see. I think the budget committee has a meeting on that third.
This room is open, so that was another key
Okay.
consideration.
And go with it.
So I'll continue my motion to change the meeting, the July meeting from July 4th to July 20th
Second.
in this room at 7 PM.
Second by Jeff. All in favor of July 20th for our next meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any other business? Motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second?
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.